Long before the name Persia was known, scattered tribes on the Iranian plateau were already shaping the world that Cyrus would inherit. The Iranian plateau, a vast expanse stretching between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, formed one of the most geographically varied regions of the ancient Near East. Its terrain, mountain chains, arid basins, and fertile valleys created both isolation and connectivity. Archaeological surveys at sites such as Tepe-Sialk, Susa, and Hazanlu indicate a pattern of settlement dating to the late Neolithic and early Chalcolithic periods, around the 6th to 4th millennia BCE. These early communities practiced subsistence agriculture, utilizing small irrigation systems in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. Material evidence of pottery, metallurgy, and cattle domestication demonstrates an increasingly complex social organization long before the emergence of recorded political entities. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, interaction between the plateau and Mesopotamian lowlands intensified. Cylinder seals and ceramics found at Susa and Godin Tepe reveal trade links with Sumerian city-states. These exchanges transmitted not only goods but also administrative techniques such as seal impressions and record-keeping, foreshadowing the bureaucratic systems that would later characterize the Achaemenid state. The Elamite civilization, centered at Susa and Anshan, emerged as the first major power in the region, maintaining contact with Akkadian and Babylonian rulers. Inscriptions from the 2nd millennium BCE attest to Elamite dynasties that developed organized kingship, monumental architecture, and a written language, key institutional precedents for later Persian governance. The plateau's topography exerted a lasting influence on cultural development. The Zagros Mountains divided communities into semi-autonomous highland valleys, encouraging tribal organization rather than centralized authority. This fragmentation fostered resilience and adaptability. Populations learned to manage scarce water resources through cannet-like proto-systems and seasonal migration. The same conditions that limited early unification later proved advantageous for military mobility and logistical self-sufficiency. The eventual Persian Empire's capacity to sustain campaigns across diverse environments had its roots in these geographic adaptations. During the early Iron Age, c. 1300 to 900 BCE, new groups speaking Indo-Iranian languages entered the region from the northeast. Linguistic and archaeological evidence links them to the broader Indo-European migrations that reshaped Eurasia. Their arrival introduced technologies such as ironworking, chariot warfare, and horse breeding, all of which enhanced mobility and warfare capacity. The Avesta, the sacred corpus of Zoroastrianism, preserves echoes of this period, referencing nomadic pastoral life, clan warfare, and the veneration of natural elements such as fire and water. While the precise dating of the Avesta remains debated, its linguistic archaism places its core hymns within this formative era. Interpretive insight. This transition from localized agrarian communities to semi-nomadic warrior societies demonstrates how environmental adaptation could coexist with emerging social stratification. The plateau's ecology produced a culture that valued both autonomy and allegiance, features that would later define Persian imperial ideology, balancing regional independence under central authority. By the 10th century BCE, Assyrian records begin to mention the Parsua and Madai, identified with early Persians and Medes inhabiting western Iran. These were not yet cohesive states but tribal confederations led by chieftains or petty kings. Assyrian inscriptions from Shalmaneser III, mid-9th century BCE, list tribute from these groups: horses, metals, and textiles. The inclusion of Iranian tribes within Assyrian economic networks signals increasing contact between Mesopotamian and Iranian polities. Archaeological excavations in Luristan have revealed bronze weaponry and decorative objects displaying stylistic fusion. Assyrian motifs rendered with distinct Iranian craftsmanship, indicating cross-cultural influence without direct conquest. Religious developments paralleled political transformation. Proto-Zoroastrian ideas, possibly reformulated from Indo-Iranian polytheism, began to emphasize moral dualism between Asha, truth and order, and Druj, falsehood and chaos. Although formal Zoroastrianism would not crystallize until later Achaemenid times, This conceptual dichotomy shaped Iranian notions of kingship and cosmic legitimacy. Interpretive insight. The moral vocabulary of order and truth provided a universal ideology capable of uniting diverse peoples, foreshadowing the Achaemenid conception of the King of Kings as the guardian of world order. Economically, the plateau functioned as a corridor between civilizations rather than an isolated hinterland. Caravans moved tin, lapis lazuli, and textiles between Central Asia and Mesopotamia. The spread of Aramaic as a lingua franca in western Iran, even before Persian dominance, reflects the commercial and administrative pragmatism that characterized the region. Archaeologists uncovered storage facilities and metallurgical workshops at sites near modern-day Kerman, demonstrating local industrial specialization tied to long-distance exchange. The integration of these routes into a single political system would later form one of Cyrus's major achievements. Interpretive insight. The plateau's role as intermediary territory explains the dual nature of Persian civilization, simultaneously continental and cosmopolitan. Its geography forced synthesis rather than isolation, compelling successive cultures to balance internal cohesion with external engagement. By the early 7th century BCE, two major Iranian powers had crystallized: the Medes in the northwest, centered around Ecbatana, and the Persians in the southwest, near Anshan and Fars. Archaeological traces of fortifications, weapon hoards, and burial mounds indicate increasing militarization and social hierarchy. Oral traditions preserved in later Greek and Near Eastern accounts describe assemblies of tribal leaders and the election of early Median kings. Although these sources are filtered through external perspectives, they suggest a gradual consolidation of authority based on both kinship and territorial control. The geopolitical vacuum left by the declining Assyrian Empire accelerated this consolidation. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, the Medes emerged as a dominant power across western Iran. Their federated model, uniting semi-autonomous tribes under a central monarch, provided the structural blueprint that the Persians would later adopt and refine. The Persians, at this stage still a subordinate group under Median hegemony, occupied a strategically valuable region connecting the Persian Gulf to the interior. According to later inscriptions, their leaders traced descent from Achaemenid, a possibly semi-legendary ancestor who symbolized continuity and legitimacy. By the mid-6th century BCE, this synthesis of geography, culture, and political adaptation reached a critical juncture. The Iranian plateau, once a mosaic of independent communities, now hosted the precursors of a unified imperial order. Its tribes had mastered survival in a harsh environment, absorbed administrative lessons from older civilizations, and articulated an emerging religious worldview centered on truth and order. As these early societies consolidated a new political power, the Medes began to define the regional order that Persia would soon surpass. By the 7th century BCE, the Medes had transformed from nomadic tribes into an organized kingdom capable of challenging Assyria itself. The emergence of the Median Confederation represents the first clear instance of large-scale political unification among the Iranian peoples. Located primarily in the northwestern highlands of Iran, the Medes occupied a strategic zone between the Zagros Mountains and the Iranian plateau, bordered by Urartu to the northwest and the remnants of Assyria to the west. The earliest Assyrian references to the Medes, under the term Madai, appear in royal inscriptions from the reign of Shalmaneser III, 858 to 824 BCE. These records describe the collection of tribute from local Median chiefs, suggesting a loosely organized network of small polities rather than a centralized state. During the 8th and early 7th centuries BCE, Assyrian expansion into the Zagros introduced iron weaponry, siege techniques, and administrative practices that deeply influenced the Medes. Archaeologists have uncovered fortified hill settlements in the Hamadan and Kangavar regions, dating to this period, showing defensive walls and uniform pottery styles, evidence of increasing social coordination. The Medes likely adopted elements of Assyrian statecraft, including record-keeping and taxation, adapting them to a confederated political structure in which authority was distributed among powerful tribal lineages. This blend of autonomy and cooperation became the hallmark of Median governance. Assyrian sources from Tiglath-Pileser III, 744 to 727 BCE, and Sargon II, 722 to 705 BCE, describe punitive campaigns into Media to suppress rebellious local rulers. The repeated necessity of such campaigns indicates that the region was difficult to subdue, its terrain favoring decentralized resistance. Interpretive insight. Geography played a decisive role in the Medes' early political identity. The mountains that hindered Assyrian control simultaneously preserved Median independence and fostered cohesion among the highland tribes. The continual pressure from Assyria catalyzed their organization into a defensive alliance, what later Greek historians would term a confederation. By the late 8th century BCE, a process of consolidation appears to have taken root. Classical sources, most notably Herodotus, describe a figure named Deioces who, through reputation for fairness, was elevated by the Median tribes to kingship around 700 BCE. While the historicity of Deioces is debated, the narrative reflects a plausible development: the transition from tribal leadership to centralized monarchy. Archaeological investigations at modern Hamadan, identified with ancient Ecbatana, the alleged Median capital, have revealed remains of massive fortifications and a multi-tiered settlement pattern consistent with an administrative center of growing importance. Interpretive insight. Even if Herodotus' account contains embellishment, its underlying principle, that legitimacy arose from arbitration and order, mirrors the political values of early Iranian societies. Kingship was justified not merely by conquest but by the ability to impose justice and maintain stability among fractious groups. This concept would later be formalized in Achaemenid ideology, where the great king was seen as the defender of Asha, truth and order. Under Deioces' purported successors, Phordes and Cyaxares, the Median Confederation expanded its influence across western Iran. Assyrian records from Esarhaddon, 680 to 669 BCE, and Ashurbanipal, 668 to 627 BCE, continue to mention Median tribes, but by this time they appear as more coordinated entities capable of diplomacy and sustained warfare. Cyaxares, according to both Babylonian and later Greek accounts, restructured the Median army by organizing it into specialized divisions of cavalry, archers, and infantry, an innovation that reflects exposure to steppe warfare traditions. The introduction of cavalry as a strategic arm would later become a defining feature of Persian military success. During the late 7th century BCE, the Medes played a decisive role in the collapse of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Babylonian Chronicle records the alliance of Cyaxares with Nabopolassar of Babylon in the assault on Nineveh in 612 BCE. Archaeological layers at the site confirm extensive destruction consistent with this event. The joint Median-Babylonian victory marked a fundamental realignment of power in the Near East. For the first time, an Iranian polity stood among the dominant powers of the region. Interpretive insight. The destruction of Assyria represented more than a geopolitical victory. It symbolized the transfer of the imperial paradigm from Mesopotamian lowlands to the Iranian highlands. The Medes, inheriting administrative techniques and diplomatic networks from their former adversaries, established a model of empire rooted in both continuity and innovation. Following the fall of Nineveh, the Medes extended their control westward into Anatolia, clashing with the Lydian kingdom. The conflict culminated around 585 BCE with a peace treaty allegedly mediated during a solar eclipse, a detail recorded by Herodotus and corroborated by modern astronomical retrocalculations. This episode underscores the Medes' integration into the international diplomacy of the ancient Near East, reflecting their emergence as a recognized equal among established powers. Internally, the Median state appears to have maintained a confederated structure. Power was concentrated in royal hands at Ecbatana, yet provincial autonomy persisted under local chieftains. This balance between central and regional authority proved stable enough to sustain expansion but fragile in succession. Little direct evidence survives of Median administration. The absence of native inscriptions contrasts with the record-keeping of their Assyrian and later Persian successors. However, the architectural remains at Ecbatana, terraced platforms, storage facilities, and fortifications suggest a degree of bureaucratic coordination sufficient to mobilize labor and resources across multiple regions. Culturally, the Medes formed a bridge between Mesopotamian and Iranian traditions. Artistic motifs recovered from Lauriston bronzes and later Achaemenid reliefs reveal continuity in iconography. Stylized animal combat scenes, rosettes, and geometric ornamentation. Linguistically, the Median language is scarcely attested, yet its influence is evident in Old Persian vocabulary and names. The persistence of Iranian religious concepts, later codified in Zoroastrianism, implies that Median elites shared in the broader ideological developments of the plateau. By the mid-6th century BCE, the Median Empire had reached its zenith. Its territory stretched from the Halys River in Anatolia to the borders of Central Asia. Yet its confederated structure made it vulnerable to internal division. Sources from later Persian inscriptions describe the Persian leader Cyrus as a vassal of the Median king Astyages before he rebelled. Babylonian chronicles confirm that in 550 BCE, Cyrus defeated Astyages and seized control of Ecbatana, effectively absorbing the Median state into the expanding Persian realm. Interpretive insight. The rapid Persian takeover illustrates the limitations of the Median political model. Confederation enabled swift rise but hindered durable centralization. When confronted by a more cohesive and administratively disciplined rival, the Median system yielded without catastrophic collapse. Its framework simply transferred into Persian hands. By the time Cyrus ascended, the Medes had laid the structural and ideological foundations for empire in Iran. They demonstrated that a coalition of tribes could evolve into a regional power capable of organized warfare, diplomacy, and governance. Their experience with Assyrian imperialism and subsequent adaptation of its mechanisms provided the Persians with a ready-made blueprint for administration and expansion. From within the Median realm, a vassal people, the Persians were preparing a quiet revolution. By the mid-6th century BCE, one provincial ruler in the Median realm began a transformation that would redefine the political geography of the ancient world. The rise of Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, marks the critical transition from regional confederation to imperial statehood in Iranian history. His emergence occurred within the complex power structure inherited from the Medes, whose confederated authority extended loosely over the Iranian plateau. The primary sources for Cyrus's early reign include the Nabonidus Chronicle, the Cyrus Cylinder, and later accounts by Herodotus and Ctesias. Together, these materials, though fragmentary and sometimes contradictory, allow reconstruction of a coherent sequence of events grounded in both archaeology and textual evidence. Cyrus was born around 600 BCE in Anshan, a region in the southwestern Zagros historically associated with the Elamites, but by this period occupied by Persians under Median suzerainty. The Nabonidus Chronicle describes Cyrus as initially king of Anshan, confirming the local and subordinate character of his early authority. Archaeological excavations at Tal-i Malyen, ancient Anshan, reveal continuity between late Elamite and early Persian material culture. Reused fortifications, local pottery traditions, and early examples of cuneiform administration adapted to Old Persian forms. These finds illustrate that the Persians were not isolated nomads but successors to a long-standing highland civilization that had already absorbed Mesopotamian administrative methods. Interpretive insight. The Persian ascent cannot be understood as an abrupt tribal uprising. Rather, it represented the political maturation of an already urbanized and literate society positioned to integrate both Iranian and Elamite traditions into a coherent polity. Herodotus reports that Cyrus's grandfather, Astyages, ruled the Median Empire at the time of Cyrus's birth and that a prophetic dream led him to attempt the child's death. While this tale is mythologized, its preservation reflects the political reality of tension between Median central authority and Persian autonomy. By the mid-6th century BCE, the Medes were experiencing internal instability, and Astyages' reliance on noble families for military support left him vulnerable to defection. The Chronicle of Nabonidus states that in 550 BCE, Cyrus attacked his lord, and that the Median army revolted and delivered Astyages in fetters. This brief entry corroborates a coup rather than a prolonged war, a swift transfer of allegiance rather than the annihilation of a kingdom. Archaeological surveys near Hamadan, ancient Ecbatana, reveal no widespread destruction layer from this period, supporting the view that Cyrus's takeover was largely bloodless. Median administrative and military elites were incorporated into the new regime with minimal disruption. Interpretive insight: the Persian conquest of Media was therefore not a rebellion in the modern sense but an internal consolidation within a shared cultural sphere. Cyrus's legitimacy rested on continuity. He claimed the Median royal heritage even as he reoriented its political center southward to Anshan and later Pasargadae. Following his victory over Astyages, Cyrus immediately reorganized his expanding realm. The creation of Pasargadae, attested archaeologically by monumental palatial complexes and finely cut limestone terraces, marked the symbolic foundation of the new empire. Inscriptions found on building fragments refer to Cyrus, the king, and Achaemenid, identifying him with a dynastic lineage tracing back to Achaemenes, a semi-legendary ancestor. This emphasis on genealogy served a critical political function. It provided the Persian monarchy with a sense of inherited legitimacy independent of both Median and Elamite precedents. Between 550 and 546 BCE, Cyrus embarked on campaigns to secure the empire's western frontier. His confrontation with Croesus of Lydia, documented by Herodotus and confirmed indirectly by the Nabonidus Chronicle, resulted in the annexation of Asia Minor. Archaeological evidence from Sardis, including a destruction layer dated to this period, supports the account of a major conquest. The integration of Lydia introduced the Persians to established administrative practices such as standardized coinage and road systems, which Cyrus preserved and expanded through the royal road network. Interpretive insight: Cyrus's Western campaigns demonstrate his pragmatic approach to imperial management. Rather than erasing local institutions, he co-opted them, an innovation that allowed rapid consolidation of territories differing in language, religion, and economy. This method would become a defining feature of Achaemenid governance. Simultaneously, Cyrus moved eastward to secure the plateau against nomadic incursions. Excavations in regions such as Parthia and Sogdia reveal fortified settlements and standardized pottery forms dating to the early Achaemenid period, indicating early efforts at administrative integration. The swift sequence of campaigns within a decade underscores the logistical capacity of the Persian army and its reliance on multi-ethnic contingents, many of whom had formerly served under Median command. The most detailed contemporary testimony to Cyrus's rule is the Cyrus cylinder, discovered in Babylon and now preserved in the British Museum. Written in Akkadian cuneiform, the text portrays Cyrus as chosen by the Babylonian god Marduk to restore order after the impieties of Nabonidus. It records that Cyrus entered Babylon without battle in 539 BCE and spared the city from calamity. While propagandistic, this inscription provides valuable evidence of Persian administrative policy and imperial ideology. Cyrus presented himself not as a conqueror but as a restorer of justice, a motif consistent with earlier Iranian ideals of lawful rule. Interpretive insight: the Cyrus cylinder reflects the fusion of Mesopotamian kingship theology with Iranian moral concepts. By portraying himself as divinely sanctioned by local deities, Cyrus extended legitimacy beyond ethnic or religious boundaries. This universalizing approach prefigured later imperial ideologies throughout Eurasia. In practical governance, Cyrus established a pattern of regional administration that later evolved into the satrapy system. Though the full system is better documented under Darius I, its origins lie in Cyrus's policy of appointing trusted governors to oversee major provinces while maintaining tribute flows to the central authority. Clay tablets from Babylon dated shortly after the conquest record the continuity of temple operations and tax records under Persian oversight, indicating that existing bureaucratic structures were left largely intact. Cyrus's reign ended around 530 BCE during a campaign in Central Asia, possibly against the Massagetæ or another nomadic confederation north of the Oxus River. Herodotus recounts his death in battle, though alternative traditions describe natural causes. Regardless of the details, his burial at Pasargadae, in a stone tomb inscribed, "I am Cyrus, the king, the Achaemenid," remains one of the best preserved monuments of early Persian statehood. The tomb's architectural simplicity, rectangular chamber atop stepped plinth, reflects both Elamite and Mesopotamian influences, symbolizing the synthesis of cultural traditions that characterized his empire. Cyrus's rule established three lasting foundations for the Achaemenid state. First, a model of empire built on continuity rather than destruction. Second, a legitimizing ideology grounded in both Iranian and Mesopotamian traditions. And third, an administrative pattern capable of incorporating vast and diverse populations. His empire stretched from the Aegean to the Hindu Kush, the largest political unit the world had yet seen. By the time of his death, Cyrus had transformed the former Median realm into an empire defined by system, tolerance, and infrastructural reach. His successors would inherit not only a vast territory but a framework for governance that balanced unity and diversity, a formula that would sustain Persia for 2 centuries. With Cyrus's death, the empire entered a new phase under Cambyses, whose expansion into Egypt tested the durability of the system his father had built. Empire demanded structure, and Persia answered with a system that would outlast its kings. The transformation of the Persian realm from a coalition of provinces into a stable, enduring empire required administrative precision on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Cyrus the Great established the precedent, but it was under Darius I, who reigned from 522 to 486 BCE, that the imperial machinery of governance reached its definitive form. The Achaemenid state expanded from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, encompassing an estimated 8 million square kilometers and more than 70 distinct ethnic groups. To manage this diversity, the Persians developed a bureaucratic framework that combined flexibility with uniform oversight, a structure centered on the satrapy system, standardized tribute, and meticulous record-keeping. Archaeological and textual sources provide unusually detailed insight into how this system functioned. The Behistun inscription, carved high into the cliffs of western Iran, stands as the most significant written monument of Darius's reign. Composed in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform, it records Darius's consolidation of power and his justification for the reorganization of the empire. The text identifies Darius as a king of kings, a formula indicating his rule over subordinate monarchs and governors. By listing the rebellious provinces and their suppression, the inscription demonstrates both the scale of imperial reach and the administrative need for standardized authority. The trilingual format itself reflects the empire's multilingual bureaucracy, in which scribes translated royal orders into regional languages to ensure local compliance. The satrapy, from Old Persian kshatrpavan, protector of the realm, functioned as the fundamental unit of provincial governance. Darius divided the empire into roughly 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap responsible for taxation, justice, and security. Babylon, Egypt, Lydia, Bactria, and Media were among the most significant. Sources such as Herodotus provide approximate tribute assessments. For example, Babylon contributed 1,000 silver talents annually, while India provided gold dust equivalent to several hundred. Though Herodotus's figures are not precise, they capture the scale and diversity of imperial revenues. Administrative tablets from Persepolis confirm the regular movement of rations, textiles, and grain between regions, attesting to a coordinated system of resource management. The Persepolis fortification and treasury tablets, written primarily in Elamite and discovered in the 20th century, provide direct evidence of daily administrative practice. Dating from roughly 509 to 494 BCE, these thousands of clay documents record disbursements of food, animal provisions, and labor assignments across a vast network of officials. They reveal a structured hierarchy of accountants, couriers, and inspectors who ensured that tribute and supplies reached their destinations. The use of seals bearing names in Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian forms indicates a multi-ethnic bureaucracy bound by procedure rather than origin. The tablets also attest to the presence of women in administrative roles, particularly in ration distribution, a detail illustrating the inclusivity and pragmatism of Persian governance. The satrapy system was not merely an instrument of taxation but a mechanism of loyalty and communication. Satraps were typically members of the royal family or trusted nobility, yet their power was balanced by royal inspectors, the so-called king's eyes and ears, who reported directly to the monarch. This dual oversight prevented provincial autonomy from devolving into independence. When rebellions did occur, as in the case of the satrap Arian in Egypt under Darius, they were swiftly contained through central intervention. This balance of delegated authority and direct surveillance allowed the empire to maintain cohesion despite immense distances. Infrastructure was essential to the system's efficiency. The royal road, extending roughly 2,700 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, exemplified Persian logistical planning. Relay stations positioned along the route enabled couriers to traverse the empire in a matter of days, a speed remarkable for the era. Herodotus famously remarked that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevented these couriers from completing their routes, a statement that underscores the dependability of the imperial communication network. Archaeological remains of these stations, along with inscriptions referencing royal way stations, Piradazish, confirm the road's integration into the administrative framework. Fiscal management reflected similar sophistication. Tribute was generally collected in silver or gold, measured according to regional capacity. The Persians avoided imposing a uniform tax rate, choosing instead to assess each satrapy based on its economic output. In return, the empire ensured stability, trade security, and infrastructural investment. Coinage reform under Darius, the introduction of the gold daric and silver siglos, standardized monetary transactions across the empire, complementing existing systems in Lydia and Babylon. The combination of tribute in kind, standardized currency, and controlled exchange rates facilitated predictable revenue streams for both state and military expenditure. The administrative use of multiple languages, Old Persian for royal inscriptions, Elamite for bureaucracy, Aramaic for correspondence, illustrates the pragmatic inclusivity of Persian governance. Aramaic in particular served as the empire's lingua franca, used on papyri, ostraca, and seals from Egypt to Bactria. The Elephantine papyri from Persian-controlled Egypt, dating to the 5th century BCE, show local officials addressing imperial authorities in Aramaic, confirming its role as the medium of official record. This linguistic pluralism reflected the empire's broader administrative philosophy: unity through structure, not assimilation. Security of the realm relied on a professional standing army supported by provincial levies. Each satrapy was responsible for maintaining troops, but command remained under the central authority. Garrisons positioned along major trade routes and at river crossings ensured both internal stability and protection of supply lines. The satrapies also contributed to the construction and maintenance of fortifications, roads, and canals, projects that linked economic integration with administrative control. The Canal of Darius, connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, exemplified the use of infrastructure as both logistical and symbolic expression of royal power. The Behistun inscription remains the ideological keystone of this system. In it, Darius describes the empire as upheld by Arda, truth, order, against Draga, lie, chaos. This duality transcended religion to become a political doctrine. The king maintained the world's balance through justice and discipline. The same principle governed administrative conduct. Fraud, rebellion, or mismanagement were framed as violations of Arda, punishable as moral as well as political offenses. Through this framework, bureaucracy assumed ethical significance. Obedience to the law was both civic and cosmic duty. The scale and endurance of the Achaemenid administrative apparatus had few precedents. Greek observers often interpreted its complexity as despotism, yet archaeological and textual evidence reveals a system remarkably rational for its time. Its combination of standardized record-keeping, regional autonomy, and continuous oversight allowed a multi-continental empire to operate with consistency for over 2 centuries. The same principles influenced successor states from the Seleucids to the Sassanids, and even informed later administrative concepts in the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. By the early 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire had become an institutionalized state rather than a personal monarchy. Its structure could survive the death or incompetence of a ruler because authority was embedded in offices, records, and procedures rather than individuals. The integration of local elites, codified taxation, and multilingual communication created a durable political organism, one capable of sustaining unprecedented territorial reach and cultural diversity. Political structure alone, however, could not unify such diversity. Ideology and religion became the empire's binding force. For the Persians, order was sacred, and their empire was its earthly reflection. The ideological foundation of the Achaemenid Empire rested upon a fusion of religion, morality, and kingship that elevated political authority into a cosmic duty. While Cyrus the Great had presented himself as a liberator chosen by local deities, his successors, particularly Darius I, formalized an imperial theology grounded in Iranian religious concepts. Chief among them the Zoroastrian principles of Asha, truth, order, and Druj chaos. Within this framework, the great king was not only a ruler by conquest but the earthly guardian of divine order, responsible for maintaining harmony among the empire's peoples and within the cosmos itself. The most explicit articulation of this ideology appears in the Behistun inscription, where Darius declares, "By the favor of Ahura Mazda I am king. Ahura Mazda bestowed the kingdom upon me." The repeated invocation of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of light, wisdom, and justice, marks a significant development from earlier, more polytheistic traditions. Although the Achaemenid kings did not impose a single state religion, their inscriptions demonstrate a consistent theological orientation that aligned royal authority with divine truth. Darius's emphasis on Arda, the Old Persian equivalent of Asha, versus Draga, Druj, provided a moral vocabulary for imperial rule. Rebellion was not merely political disobedience but a manifestation of falsehood, an affront to both king and cosmos. Archaeological and textual evidence across the empire reflects the integration of this ideology into state symbolism. Fire altars, often depicted in reliefs at Persepolis and Rustum, are central to Achaemenid iconography. They represent the ritual maintenance of sacred fire, a material symbol of Asha and divine purity. At Rustum, beneath Darius's tomb inscription, the king is shown raising his right hand toward a winged figure, interpreted by most scholars as Ahura Mazda, while standing before an altar flame. This imagery unites political and spiritual order. The king's gesture of worship signifies his subordination to divine law even as he embodies it on earth. The Achaemenid approach to religion was not doctrinaire but integrative. While the royal ideology drew heavily from Zoroastrian ethics, it coexisted with and often incorporated local traditions throughout the empire. In Babylon, Cyrus's earlier inscriptions invoked Marduk. In Egypt, Darius commissioned hieroglyphic texts depicting him as a legitimate pharaoh favored by Egyptian gods. This adaptability reflects the empire's pragmatic tolerance. Yet the underlying concept of kingship as divinely sanctioned and morally obligated remained constant. The king's legitimacy derived not only from lineage but from alignment with Asha, the universal order that governed gods and men alike. The administrative and judicial systems reinforced these ethical principles. The data, or royal law, functioned as an extension of Asha, establishing justice through written decrees and precedent. Darius's inscriptions repeatedly affirm his role as a just ruler. "I am not a friend to the wrongdoer. I am not hot-tempered. I punish the liar." These statements, far from rhetorical flourish, codified a moral expectation for governance. The great king's authority was inseparable from his moral conduct. Failure to embody truth and justice risked both political instability and divine disfavor. Material culture further illustrates how this ideology permeated imperial expression. The architecture of Persepolis, symmetrical, elevated, and meticulously ordered, mirrored the cosmic hierarchy articulated in Achaemenid thought. Each relief, from the processional delegations to the enthroned king, communicated an image of harmony among diverse peoples united under divine rule. The repetition of ordered, rhythmic motifs in palatial designs served not only aesthetic purposes but ideological ones. They visually asserted that Persian governance was an extension of the natural and divine order. The linguistic evidence reinforces this continuity between religion and rulership. In Old Persian inscriptions, Ahura Mazda is invariably described as the creator of heaven, earth, man, and happiness, establishing him as both cosmic architect and moral arbiter. The king's success, victories, and justice were attributed to divine favor rather than personal ambition. This humility before divine authority distinguished Achaemenid royal ideology from the more autocratic divinization of kings seen in Egypt or later Hellenistic states. The Persian monarch was not a god but the chosen executor of divine will, accountable to Ahura Mazda through righteousness and good governance. The influence of Zoroastrian ethics also shaped the empire's administrative culture. The emphasis on Asha encouraged bureaucratic regularity, honesty in record-keeping, and loyalty to lawful order. The Persepolis fortification tablets occasionally contained formulaic blessings invoking Ahura Mazda's protection over officials, suggesting that moral obligation extended beyond the royal court into daily bureaucratic operations. Justice, truthfulness, and respect for contracts were not abstract ideals but operational standards for imperial governance. Beyond administration, the diffusion of Zoroastrian ideas throughout the empire's provinces left enduring cultural traces. In Anatolia and the Levant, Persian-era sanctuaries exhibit evidence of fire altars and ritual installations associated with Iranian practice. In Central Asia, linguistic parallels in later Sogdian and Bactrian texts preserve echoes of Achaemenid-era cosmology. These findings suggest that, although the empire's religious policy was non-coercive, its ideological vocabulary of truth, order, and divine kingship spread organically through contact and example. Royal inscriptions composed under later rulers, including Xerxes, continued to invoke Ahura Mazda and condemn rebellion as Draga. The constancy of this theological lexicon across generations points to its institutionalization within imperial identity. Even as political fortunes fluctuated, the moral framework remained stable. The empire's cohesion depended as much on shared ethical language as on military or administrative control. From a historical perspective, the Achaemenid synthesis of religious morality and political order represents one of antiquity's most influential ideological systems. It offered a universal rationale for empire, grounded in the idea that lawful governance reflected cosmic balance. Subsequent Iranian dynasties, as well as foreign observers such as the Greeks and later Romans, adopted elements of this paradigm. Herodotus's admiration for Persian justice and Xenophon's Cyropaedia both testify to the enduring impression of Persian moral governance on later political thought. By binding divine legitimacy to ethical governance, the Persians established a model of rulership that transcended dynastic succession. The great king ruled by virtue of truth, not merely by force. The empire's endurance for over 2 centuries attests to the stability of this principle, which balanced pragmatic tolerance with moral universality. Religious order translated into cultural unity, visible in every road, palace, and inscription. At Persepolis, stone became language, each relief a declaration of world order. Persepolis was not simply a palace complex. It was a statement carved in limestone, a spatial articulation of Achaemenid ideology. Founded by Darius I around 518 BCE and expanded by his successors, particularly Xerxes I, Persepolis embodied the empire's conception of order, hierarchy, and divine kingship. Located on a terrace rising from the Marv-dashed plain in southwestern Iran, the site was designed not for daily administration but for ceremonial display, a stage upon which the moral and political structure of the empire could be materialized. Archaeological evidence reveals the deliberate precision with which the city was planned. The terrace, measuring approximately 450 by 300 meters, was constructed of massive stone blocks fitted without mortar, elevated to dominate the surrounding landscape. Access was controlled through monumental gateways, most notably the Gate of All Nations, an entrance built under Xerxes that symbolized the universal reach of Persian authority. Its flanking massive figures, winged bulls with human heads, recall Assyrian prototypes, yet in Achaemenid context they served a new purpose, not to intimidate but to represent the cosmic guardianship of the empire's order. Every element of the approach to the terrace was designed to impress upon visitors the grandeur and stability of Persian rule. At the heart of the complex stood the Apadana, Darius's great audience hall. Covering nearly 1,000 square meters and supported by 72 stone columns, each originally over 20 meters tall, the Apadana was among the largest roof structures of the ancient world. The building's reliefs are its most significant source of historical information. Along the staircases, delegations from across the empire bring gifts to the enthroned king. Each group is distinct, identifiable by clothing, hairstyle, and tribute, yet all approach in ordered procession. The artistic restraint and uniform rhythm of the figures convey harmony rather than subjugation. The message is explicit. Under the great king, diversity becomes unity, difference becomes order. This imagery reflects the ideological synthesis articulated in Darius's inscriptions, the moral order of Asha rendered in stone. Just as the empire was a microcosm of divine truth, Persepolis was a microcosm of the empire itself. The reliefs present an idealized image of cooperation among peoples, devoid of violence or chaos. Scholars have long noted that, unlike the triumphal scenes of Mesopotamian or Egyptian art, Achaemenid reliefs omit depictions of battle. Power is expressed not through conquest but through composure. The absence of conflict visualizes the ultimate success of Persian governance. Peace achieved through rightful rule. Construction inscriptions discovered throughout the site provide further insight into its meaning and organization. One text from Darius records, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, this palace which I built at Parsa, I built it secure and beautiful." The formulaic invocation of divine favor situates Persepolis within the same moral and cosmic framework as the Behistun inscription. Another document lists the diverse origins of its workforce: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Ionians among them, confirming that the empire's subjects were directly involved in constructing the very image of their collective order. The building process thus mirrored the ideological narrative of unity in diversity that the reliefs portrayed. Archaeological analysis of materials corroborates this multicultural composition. Stone was quarried locally, but cedar beams came from Lebanon, gold from Lydia, and lapis lazuli from distant Bactria. This vast logistical network not only demonstrated imperial reach but symbolized the integration of the known world within Persian dominion. The physical act of assembling Persepolis was itself an act of empire, a fusion of labor, resources, and artistry from across the Achaemenid realm. The architectural layout further reinforces the concept of hierarchical access and ritualized space. The approach to the Apadana required ascending successive terraces, each transition narrowing and framing the visitor's perspective. This spatial choreography transformed physical ascent into a symbolic journey toward the axis of authority. By the time envoys reached the audience hall, the architecture had already instilled the intended psychological impression: awe before the structured order of the great king's world. Beyond the Apadana, other key buildings expanded upon this ceremonial core. The Hall of 100 Columns, completed under Xerxes, served as a throne hall and possibly the setting for the imperial Nowruz, New Year, celebrations. Its vast interior, supported by towering fluted columns, projected the same aesthetic of disciplined symmetry seen throughout the complex. Adjoining palaces, the Takara, Darius's private residence, and the Hadish, Xerxes's palace, exhibit inscriptions affirming royal continuity. Each king credits his predecessor and Ahura Mazda for the construction, reinforcing dynastic legitimacy through shared devotion. Iconographic details across Persepolis echo the empire's moral ideology. The repeated motif of the king fighting a lion or bull, found on column capitals and stairway reliefs, symbolizes not mere physical strength but cosmic balance, the triumph of order, Asha, over chaos, Druj. Similarly, floral patterns and alternating human-animal forms evoke the fertility and harmony of the world under just governance. These visual codes, standardized yet subtle, functioned as a universal language comprehensible to all within the empire's sphere. While Persepolis was primarily ceremonial, administrative activity was not absent. The Persepolis fortification tablets, written in Elamite and dating to Darius's reign, record rations, labor distribution, and transport logistics. They reveal a sophisticated bureaucracy operating within and around the ceremonial center, ensuring that the site's grandeur was supported by meticulous management. The integration of art, architecture, and administration exemplifies the Achaemenid approach. Order in every domain, from imperial imagery to economic record-keeping. The eventual destruction of Persepolis by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE underscores its symbolic potency. Ancient accounts suggest that the Macedonian conqueror's decision to burn the city was not strategic but performative, an act of erasing the monumental expression of Persian kingship. Yet even in ruins, Persepolis continued to embody the aesthetic and ideological achievements of the Achaemenid world. Its terraces, stairways, and inscriptions preserve the memory of an empire that defined power not through fear but through structure, symmetry, and faith in divine order. Persepolis thus stands as the architectural synthesis of Achaemenid civilization. Every stone communicates the principles that sustained the empire: unity through diversity, discipline through design, authority through moral truth. It remains one of antiquity's most eloquent expressions of how architecture can translate ideology into enduring form. From these ceremonial centers, Persia projected its image across continents. No empire before Persia had moved information faster. The Achaemenid Empire's success rested not only on military conquest or royal authority, but on an infrastructure system that transformed governance across continents. Central to this achievement was the Royal Road, an engineered artery that stretched approximately 2,700 kilometers from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in the imperial heartland. Constructed and organized under Darius I in the late 6th century BCE, this network represented the first known attempt to integrate a vast empire through controlled, predictable movement of people, goods, and information. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, famously remarked that nothing mortal travels faster than the Persian couriers, a statement that reflects both admiration and historical accuracy. The Royal Road was more than a single continuous highway. Archaeological and textual evidence indicate a system of interconnected routes extending north to Armenia and south toward the Persian Gulf, with lateral branches reaching Babylon, Ecbatana, and Persepolis. The road followed existing trade and military paths, which Darius formalized into a standardized imperial network. This integration turned local routes into a continental grid. Archaeologists have identified segments near Gordium and along the Halys River that align with Herodotus's descriptions of the stations and river crossings. The route's engineering, featuring graded surfaces, stone paving in select regions, and well-defined milestones, underscores the empire's logistical sophistication. At intervals of roughly 25 to 30 kilometers, the Persians established Peridazish stations, relay points where couriers could rest, change horses, and continue without delay. Herodotus estimated 111 such stations between Sardis and Susa. These posts formed the foundation of the Achaemenid communication system, enabling messages to traverse the empire in as little as 7 days, a feat unmatched until modern times. Each relay was staffed by officials and guards, ensuring the security and accuracy of transmissions. Clay tablets from Persepolis provide administrative evidence for such networks, recording the allocation of rations to workers, stable hands, and messengers operating between key centers. The Peridazish couriers embodied the empire's principle of order through regulation. They carried messages sealed with royal insignia, ensuring authenticity and confidentiality. According to one Elamite tablet, a courier dispatched from Susa received provisions in the name of the king, suggesting that communication was a direct extension of royal authority. This system did not merely relay information, it sustained imperial cohesion. Governors, or satraps, relied on this infrastructure to transmit tax data, mobilize troops, and enforce decrees. The speed and reliability of correspondence allowed the central administration to respond to revolts or local issues with unprecedented precision. From an analytical standpoint, the Royal Road functioned as both a physical and political instrument. It allowed the Achaemenid government to translate the concept of empire, a multi-ethnic, geographically vast entity, into practical governance. Geography, once a barrier, became a tool of control. The road's alignment through varied terrains, mountains, plains, and deserts, demonstrated the empire's ability to impose order upon nature itself. The logistics of maintenance were equally significant. Inscriptions credit Darius with the construction and repair of bridges, causeways, and stations. His administrative inscriptions emphasize artaka, truth, and order, as guiding principles, implying that the physical maintenance of roads symbolized the moral maintenance of the empire. Trade followed governance. The same infrastructure that carried royal commands also carried merchants, caravans, and ideas. The route connected the Aegean world with the Mesopotamian plains, facilitating exchanges of metalwork, textiles, and agricultural goods. Coinage reforms introduced under Darius, notably the gold daric and silver siglos, further enabled these transactions by standardizing economic exchange. Archaeological evidence of Persian coins found in Asia Minor, Egypt, and the Indus Valley attests to this interconnected economy. The circulation of standardized coinage along imperial roads created a monetary unity paralleling the political one. Security along these routes was paramount. Royal guards and local militias ensured safe passage, and punishments for interference with couriers were severe. The satrapal system ensured that regional governors took responsibility for their respective segments. The combination of local oversight and central regulation reflects a key interpretive insight into Persian governance. Rather than imposing direct control over every region, the empire maintained stability through delegated but monitored autonomy. The roads exemplified this balance, centrally conceived but regionally sustained. Beyond practical utility, the royal road carried symbolic weight. It materialized the king's presence across space, binding distant territories into the same administrative and moral order. In this sense, the road was a ritual landscape. Every courier, every caravan, every repaired bridge reaffirmed the unity of the empire under Ahura Mazda's protection. Greek observers, despite their political rivalry with Persia, often expressed admiration for this disciplined infrastructure. Herodotus's phrase, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents them from completing their appointed course," later adapted as the unofficial creed of postal services, encapsulates the enduring impression Persian logistics made on the ancient world. The royal road also served as an instrument of cultural exchange. Ideas, artistic motifs, and administrative practices traveled alongside trade. Architectural influences from Lydia and Mesopotamia appeared in Persian art, while Zoroastrian ethical concepts may have influenced later philosophical traditions in the Near East. The infrastructure thus became a conduit of cultural diffusion, indirectly shaping the intellectual landscape of subsequent empires. Archaeological surveys continue to reveal evidence of Achaemenid roadworks. Traces of stone pavements, caravanserai foundations, and milestones correspond to Herodotian accounts. Remote sensing in western Iran has identified linear alignments consistent with imperial route patterns, supporting the hypothesis that the network remained functional well into the Hellenistic period. The longevity of this system, maintained by the Seleucids and later by the Parthians, underscores its foundational role in Eurasian communication history. In administrative archives from Persepolis, ration records show standardized units for couriers and drivers, indicating that even the smallest logistical details were subject to central oversight. This bureaucratic precision illustrates the Achaemenid commitment to order as both an ethical and operational principle. The royal road was, in effect, the empire's circulatory system. It moved not only information but legitimacy, sustaining the rhythm of imperial life. By integrating regions from the Mediterranean to the Iranian plateau, the Achaemenid network became the prototype for later imperial infrastructures, from Roman roads to the Silk Road systems of later centuries. Its success lay in combining technical engineering, bureaucratic structure, and moral ideology into a coherent system of control. With communication mastered, trade became the empire's lifeblood. Gold flowed through Persia like a river, sustained by routes that stretched from the Nile to the Indus. The Achaemenid Empire was the first state in history to unify the major economic zones of the ancient world under a single administrative system. Spanning from the Aegean to the Indus, from the Oxus to the Nile, Persia connected agrarian, maritime, and urban economies that had previously functioned in isolation. This vast integration transformed local exchange networks into a coherent transcontinental economy. Its foundations rested on standardized taxation, coinage, irrigation, and infrastructure, all coordinated through the same bureaucratic mechanisms that underpinned political stability. Trade within this system followed both land and sea routes. On land, the royal road connected Sardis, Babylon, and Susa, while subsidiary roads linked Bactria and the Indus Valley to the imperial core. Maritime routes extended from the Persian Gulf to the Indus Delta, with ports such as Gera and Bahrain, ancient Dilmun, facilitating commerce in spices, pearls, and textiles. Egyptian ports along the Red Sea, including Berenice and Myos Hormuz, served as nodes in the empire's western maritime trade. Archaeological finds, such as Achaemenid period ceramics in the Persian Gulf and Persian seals in the Indus Valley, confirm the vitality of these routes. Economic administration was conducted through an elaborate tribute system. Each satrapy was assigned a fixed annual contribution, recorded in both silver and natural produce. Herodotus's Histories, Book 3, enumerates these assessments in detail. Babylonia, for instance, provided 1,000 silver talents and vast quantities of grain. Egypt supplied 600 talents, along with linen and grain for the royal stables. These tributes sustained the imperial treasury, allowing for the payment of officials, the maintenance of garrisons, and large-scale construction projects. Yet tribute was not purely extractive. In return, the empire provided security, legal consistency, and access to long-distance markets. The introduction of standardized coinage under Darius I was among the most transformative reforms. Before the Achaemenids, most regions relied on weighed bullion or local issues. Darius established two principal denominations: the gold daric, approximately 8.4 grams, and the silver siglos, around 5.6 grams. Minted at Sardis and other imperial centers, these coins bore the image of the king as archer, a symbolic fusion of divine legitimacy and military readiness. The uniform weight and purity of these coins facilitated interregional trade and taxation, effectively creating the first stable, state-backed currency zone. Finds of darics in Greece, Egypt, and the Black Sea region attest to their circulation well beyond Persian borders, indicating that the empire's currency became a de facto international standard. The Persian economy also relied heavily on agriculture, managed through advanced irrigation systems that supported population growth and urbanization. Chief among these were the qanats, subterranean tunnels that tapped groundwater and conveyed it to arid plains. The earliest large-scale qanats date to the Achaemenid period, particularly in Fars and Khorasan. Inscriptions from Darius's reign celebrate the king as a bringer of water, equating irrigation with moral governance. The construction and maintenance of these systems were managed by local communities under imperial oversight, ensuring stable agricultural yields even in marginal regions. This hydraulic engineering allowed the Persians to convert previously barren lands into productive farmland, sustaining the tax base and food supply that underwrote imperial power. Agricultural production was diversified across ecological zones. The floodplains of Mesopotamia and Egypt produced grain and flax. Anatolia yielded metals and timber. Bactria and the Indus Valley supplied horses, precious stones, and exotic goods. Administrative records from Persepolis, the fortification tablets, list detailed disbursements of grain, wine, and livestock across these regions. They document a complex redistribution system in which resources moved both vertically, from satrapy to center, and horizontally, between provinces. Such coordination required an unprecedented level of bureaucratic control. Each delivery was recorded with quantities, recipients, and the names of supervisors, a level of accountability that indicates systemic economic planning rather than mere tribute extraction. Commerce under the Achaemenids was not restricted to state channels. Private merchants, many of them Aramaic-speaking intermediaries, operated across imperial borders. The widespread use of Aramaic as an administrative lingua franca facilitated contracts, receipts, and correspondence between distant regions. Elephant ivory from India, lapis lazuli from Bactria, papyrus from Egypt, and olive oil from Ionia moved through markets connected by Persian oversight. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Sardis and Susa reveals standardized weights, seals, and storage facilities, hallmarks of a regulated yet vibrant market economy. Achaemenid trade policy reflected a pragmatic approach to diversity. Rather than imposing uniform laws, the empire allowed regional customs and economic systems to persist as long as they did not impede taxation or stability. For example, Babylon retained its temple-based economic structure, while Phoenician cities continued their maritime trade traditions. This tolerance promoted efficiency and reduced resistance. The Persian model thus combined central regulation with local autonomy, a structure that allowed for rapid economic recovery after conquests and fostered enduring prosperity. The empire's commercial reach extended even into regions beyond direct control. Greek city-states along the Aegean benefited from Persian protection of trade routes, and Persian gold financed Greek mercenaries during various conflicts. In the east, the Achaemenids maintained contact with the Indian subcontinent through the province of Gandhara, exchanging horses, textiles, and precious metals. In the north, Central Asian trade routes connected Bactria and Sogdiana with the steppe world, foreshadowing the later Silk Road. Through these channels, Persian administrative techniques, from coinage to record-keeping, diffused across Eurasia. From an analytical perspective, the Persian economy illustrates the first successful fusion of imperial bureaucracy with market mechanisms. Economic integration served as the practical expression of Asha, order, and truth in material terms. By standardizing weights, measures, and currency while allowing cultural variation, the Achaemenids achieved a level of stability unmatched in the ancient world. The empire's prosperity was not accidental but engineered through systems that balanced control with flexibility. This transcontinental integration created what historians often describe as the first global economy of the ancient world. Wealth moved in multiple directions, not simply toward the center. Egyptian grain fed Persian armies. Lydian artisans adorned imperial palaces. Indian traders supplied luxury goods consumed in Babylon and Susa. The network functioned as an economic ecosystem sustained by mutual dependency. The model would later inspire both the Roman and Islamic empires, whose trade systems consciously imitated Persian precedents. Archaeological surveys continue to reveal the breadth of this integration. Persian administrative seals have been unearthed in the Indus region, while derricks appear in hordes from the Aegean to Bactria. Storage jars bearing Aramaic inscriptions found in Egypt indicate standardized record-keeping practices across thousands of kilometers. These artifacts attest to a level of coordination that could only exist under centralized imperial authority. In sum, the Achaemenid Empire transformed trade from a regional enterprise into a state-managed system of continental scale. Through coinage, irrigation, infrastructure, and policy, Persia created the economic foundation upon which later empires would build. Its wealth was not merely the product of conquest but of connection, a structured network linking distant worlds into a single economic order. Prosperity fueled expansion, and expansion would soon test the empire's unity. In Persia's provinces, empire felt less like conquest and more like accommodation. At the heart of the Achaemenid system lay a paradox. An empire of unprecedented size maintained not through uniformity, but through tolerance. From the Aegean to the Indus, provincial populations retained their languages, religions, and local institutions under Persian supervision. This balance between control and autonomy formed the basis of 2 centuries of stability, a model of imperial governance rarely matched in antiquity. The Achaemenids understood that to rule diversity, they had to systematize it. The satrapy system provided the administrative framework for this policy. Each province, or diava, was governed by a satrap, a royal appointee responsible for collecting tribute, maintaining order, and enforcing decrees. Yet within these provinces, local structures often remained intact. Native elites administered daily affairs, temples continued their rituals, and local laws governed civil disputes. The satrap represented imperial oversight, not complete replacement. As recorded in Babylonian economic tablets from the reign of Darius I, city officials continued to use Akkadian cuneiform for contracts and receipts, suggesting that Persian rule coexisted with long-established bureaucratic traditions. The Aramaic papyri from Elephantine, an island in the Nile near Aswan, provide one of the clearest windows into provincial life under Persian rule. These documents, dating to the 5th century BCE, record the existence of a Jewish military colony serving under Persian command. The community maintained its own temple to Yahweh, operated within local legal structures, and communicated with Persian authorities in Aramaic. The correspondence between the garrison and the governor of Judah demonstrates both administrative integration and religious autonomy. When the temple was destroyed by Egyptian locals, the Elephantine community petitioned the Persian satrap of Egypt for permission to rebuild, and permission was granted. This episode illustrates the Persian commitment to pragmatic tolerance. As long as loyalty and taxes were maintained, cultural and religious variation was accepted. Language policy reinforced this accommodation. Rather than imposing Persian as the administrative medium, the empire adopted Imperial Aramaic as a lingua franca. Its simplicity and adaptability made it suitable for communication across regions where dozens of languages were spoken. Aramaic documents found from Bactria to Egypt demonstrate a standardized bureaucratic style, ensuring that orders could circulate efficiently without erasing local linguistic traditions. This multilingual pragmatism was one of the empire's most effective tools of cohesion. In religious matters, the Achaemenids projected a similar flexibility. Cyrus the Great's famed edict recorded on the Cyrus cylinder allowed displaced peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands and restore their temples. In Babylon, the Persians restored the sanctuaries of Marduk. In Egypt, Darius I funded repairs to temples at Hybes and other oases. Such policies were not purely benevolent. They reinforced the legitimacy of Persian rule by aligning the great king with divine order in each cultural context. By supporting local cults, the Achaemenids framed themselves as protectors of Asha, truth and right, manifested through harmony among peoples. Economically, local autonomy extended to land tenure and taxation. The empire standardized tribute quotas but allowed provinces to decide how these were collected internally. In Egypt, grain taxation followed existing Nile flood cycles. In Babylonia, temple estates and private merchants managed production under imperial supervision. Contracts from Babylon reveal that Persians seldom interfered in daily economic transactions. Instead, imperial agents ensured the flow of tribute and the maintenance of infrastructure. This decentralized efficiency minimized administrative resistance and encouraged regional prosperity. The empire's tolerance also had a strategic dimension. By empowering local elites, the Achaemenids transformed potential rivals into collaborators. Satraps often came from noble families of the conquered territories, a deliberate policy that reinforced loyalty. In Lydia, for instance, native aristocrats continued to hold administrative roles after Croesus's defeat. In Phoenicia, the city-states retained their kingship structures in exchange for naval service. Such arrangements allowed the Persians to govern complex territories without constant military enforcement. From an analytical perspective, this provincial model represents an early form of federal administration. The central government maintained sovereignty through tribute, law, and military presence, while allowing considerable regional discretion. The strength of the system lay in its adaptability. When revolts occurred, as in Egypt and Babylonia, they were treated as local crises, not existential threats. The empire's capacity to absorb and restabilize after such events demonstrates its administrative resilience. Cultural exchange within provinces further strengthened imperial unity. Persian art and administrative practices blended with local traditions to create hybrid forms visible in architecture and material culture. In Anatolia, Greek craftsmen adapted Achaemenid motifs into local sculpture. In Central Asia, Persian administrative seals appear alongside local iconography. These fusions reflect not forced assimilation but gradual convergence. The empire's diversity became its cultural signature, a mosaic of influences unified by shared systems of record-keeping, tribute, and ideology. The Achaemenid principle of governance rested on the belief that order did not require uniformity. As long as the king's authority and the empire's economic flow were secure, plurality could flourish. This pragmatic tolerance distinguished Persia from earlier empires that sought domination through cultural homogenization. It also ensured longevity. The administrative traditions established under the Achaemenids persisted under the Seleucids, Parthians, and even the early Islamic caliphates. The evidence from Elephantine, Babylon, Sardis, and Persepolis converges on a single conclusion: Persian rule was not experienced as a continuous occupation, but as a managed coexistence. Imperial structures provided stability while allowing local identities to persist. This equilibrium made the Achaemenid world a rare example of sustained multi-ethnic governance in antiquity, balancing authority with accommodation. Yet beyond its borders, a restless power in the Aegean was watching. The spark that would ignite centuries of conflict began on the shores of Asia Minor. By the close of the 6th century BCE, the Achaemenid Empire stretched farther than any polity before it. Yet, at its western edge, among the bustling port cities of Ionia, Persian order met a world that valued independence above empire. The Ionian Revolt, 499 to 493 BCE, was more than a regional uprising. It was the first open confrontation between Persian imperial authority and the fiercely autonomous Greek polis. It would sow the seeds of a conflict that defined the ancient world for generations. The origins of the revolt lay in the complex relationship between the Ionian Greeks and their Persian overlords. After Cyrus the Great's conquest of Lydia around 546 BCE, the Ionian city-states, including Miletus, Ephesus, and Smyrna, became part of the Persian satrapy of Sardis. They retained local governments and continued to trade across the Aegean, but their autonomy was constrained by Persian-appointed tyrants who ruled in place of citizen assemblies. For decades, this arrangement held steady. Persian administration provided security, and commerce flourished. Yet beneath the surface, resentment simmered. The Greek ideal of civic freedom clashed with Persian concepts of hierarchical rule. The immediate spark came from Miletus, long the intellectual and commercial heart of Ionia. Its tyrant, Aristagoras, faced political and personal instability after a failed Persian campaign against Naxos. Desperate to save his position, Aristagoras renounced Persian authority and called upon the Ionian cities to join him in revolt. According to Herodotus, the message spread rapidly across the Aegean coast, a cry for freedom that resonated with long-suppressed discontent. The rebellion gained early momentum. In 498 BCE, the Ionians, aided by ships from Athens and Eretria, launched an audacious strike against Sardis, the Persian satrapal capital in Asia Minor. The city was captured and partially burned, though the citadel held. To the Greeks, this was a symbolic victory, a glimpse of defiance against the greatest empire of their age. To Darius I, it was sacrilege. Herodotus recounts that upon hearing of Sardis's destruction, Darius took up his bow, fired an arrow into the air, and commanded a servant to remind him 3 times each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." The Persian response was swift and overwhelming. By 497 BCE, imperial forces under Darius's generals Artaphernes and Datis swept through Asia Minor. The revolt fragmented as local loyalties divided and resources dwindled. City after city fell. The once proud Miletus, epicenter of the uprising, was besieged and destroyed in 494 BCE after the decisive naval battle of Lade. Archaeological evidence from the site, layers of ash and collapsed masonry, confirms the scale of its devastation. The survivors were enslaved or deported to the Persian Gulf region. Herodotus describes the event with somber finality. Miletus was left empty of men. The suppression of the Ionian revolt revealed both the strengths and limitations of the Persian imperial system. Militarily, the empire demonstrated its logistical power, mobilizing troops from across Anatolia, deploying its fleet efficiently, and re-establishing control within a few years. Yet politically, The revolt exposed the fragility of Persian rule in regions with deep traditions of local autonomy. The satrapy system had relied on pragmatic cooperation. When that broke down, rebellion was inevitable. In the aftermath, Darius sought not only to restore order but to prevent recurrence. Reforms followed. Cities were reorganized, tribute reassessed, and local tyrannies replaced in some cases by oligarchic councils loyal to Persia. This pragmatic recalibration suggests that Darius understood the revolt as a failure of administration as much as of obedience. Persian policy, though authoritarian in structure, often adapted to circumstance rather than relying solely on coercion. However, one consequence of the revolt could not be undone: the enmity between Persia and the Greek mainland. The participation of Athens and Eretria, though limited, transformed a provincial rebellion into a geopolitical flashpoint. To Darius, this was not a distant skirmish but a direct challenge to imperial sovereignty. From this moment, Greek and Persian destinies became entwined in a narrative of vengeance, pride, and cultural contrast. Herodotus, writing decades later, portrays the Ionian revolt as the inevitable collision between freedom and tyranny. Yet archaeology paints a subtler picture, one of pragmatic resistance rather than ideological crusade. The Ionians did not seek to destroy Persia. They sought to restore the autonomy they had known under Lydian rule. The Athenians, newly democratic and restless, saw in their rebellion both a mirror and a warning of their own fragile liberty. The flames that consumed Sardis burned brighter in Greek imagination than in Persian archives, but they illuminated the ideological gulf that would soon widen into war. The Ionian revolt thus stands as a prelude, a testing ground where two political worlds first measured each other's resolve. Persia's power remained unbroken, but its aura of invincibility was diminished. The Greeks had seen that even the mightiest empire could bleed, and the Persians learned that the western frontier would never again be quiet. The revolt's failure did not end resistance, it merely invited retribution. When Persia's armies crossed into Greece, the world held its breath. The Persian Wars 490 to 479 BCE represent the first major clash between the Achaemenid Empire and the Greek city-states, a series of campaigns that tested the logistical and military capabilities of both civilizations. Following the Ionian revolt, Darius I resolved to punish the Athenians and Eretrians, whose support of the rebellion had provoked imperial wrath. The resulting invasions marked an unprecedented projection of Persian power into the Aegean and the Greek mainland, illustrating both the empire's strategic reach and the limitations imposed by distance and terrain. The first campaign, culminating in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, was led by Datis and Artaphernes, Persian generals tasked with subjugating Athens and Eretria. According to Herodotus, the fleet consisted of approximately 600 triremes, while land forces numbered around 25,000. Modern estimates, drawing on logistical analysis and archaeological surveys near Marathon, suggest the Persian contingent may have been smaller, yet still significant. The Athenians, with a force of roughly 10,000 hoplites, exploited local terrain to neutralize Persian cavalry advantages. The marshy plains and constricted approach allowed the Greeks to maintain cohesion, and a decisive frontal engagement along the Persian center inflicted substantial losses, reportedly killing several thousand enemy soldiers while sustaining minimal casualties themselves. Marathon demonstrated that tactical discipline, knowledge of local geography, and heavy infantry could counter even the most expansive imperial army. The Persian response to Marathon was delayed by Darius's death in 486 BCE, which transferred command to his son Xerxes I. Xerxes inherited both the ambition and infrastructure necessary for a renewed invasion. Preparing between 484 and 481 BCE, Xerxes mobilized an unprecedented army, drawing troops from across the empire: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, and contingents from subject satrapies. Herodotus lists over 2 million participants, though modern scholarship generally interprets this figure as a symbolic exaggeration, suggesting a more likely figure of 200,000 to 300,000 combatants. Supplementing the army, a vast fleet of 600 to 1,200 ships traversed the Aegean, using constructed pontoon bridges, such as the one across the Hellespont, to facilitate rapid deployment of men and material. These engineering feats exemplify Persian logistical planning and the empire's ability to organize resources on a continental scale. The invasion of 480 BCE began with the advance through Thrace and Macedon into Thessaly, encountering initial resistance but achieving rapid territorial gains. Greek city-states, recognizing the magnitude of the threat, formed the Hellenic League under Spartan leadership. The defensive strategy concentrated on strategic choke points, most notably the pass at Thermopylae. There, a small Greek contingent, led by King Leonidas and numbering roughly 7,000 troops, faced a Persian army of tens of thousands. For 3 days they held the pass, utilizing narrow terrain to offset numerical inferiority. Archaeological surveys confirm the pass's geography corresponds to Herodotus's description, supporting the historical plausibility of such a defense. The eventual Persian breakthrough, facilitated by betrayal and flanking maneuvers, resulted in the death of Leonidas and the Spartans' near-total annihilation, a tactical loss but a strategic delay that allowed Greek city-states to mobilize more effectively. Concurrent with land operations, the Persian fleet attempted to subdue the Greek navy, which was concentrated at Artemisium. Despite numerical superiority, the Persian forces struggled with coordination and local navigational challenges. Following Thermopylae, the Persians advanced into central Greece, occupying Athens, which had been evacuated. Yet the destruction of the city did not result in the submission of the Hellenic League. The naval battle of Salamis later that year became decisive. The Greek fleet, numbering roughly 380 triremes, leveraged narrow straits to neutralize Persian numerical advantage. Herodotus and archaeological evidence suggest that Persian ships, larger and less maneuverable, were funneled into confined waters, where Greek tactical cohesion led to the capture or destruction of a significant portion of the fleet. This defeat forced Xerxes to retreat to Asia, leaving a substantial land contingent under Mardonius to continue the campaign. The final confrontations occurred in 479 BCE at Plataea and Mycale. At Plataea, the Greek army, now approximately 40,000 strong, confronted Mardonius's remaining forces. The battle was decisive. Persian troops were routed, with heavy casualties, and Mardonius himself was killed. Simultaneously, the naval engagement at Mycale resulted in the destruction of the remaining Persian fleet in the Aegean. Archaeological surveys at Plataea and Mycale corroborate Herodotus's accounts of fortifications, mass graves, and battle debris, confirming large-scale engagements and substantial Persian losses. Collectively, these defeats marked the end of Persian attempts to expand westward into mainland Greece. Analysis of the Persian campaigns highlights several operational strengths and weaknesses. The empire's ability to mobilize troops from multiple satrapies, construct temporary bridges, and maintain supply lines over hundreds of kilometers demonstrates sophisticated administrative and logistical capacity. Yet these campaigns also exposed vulnerabilities. Overextension, reliance on subject contingents with varying loyalty, and difficulty in projecting sustained power into terrain dominated by independent polities. Greek victories, while enabled by local tactical advantages, exploited these structural limits. Economically, the campaigns imposed significant burdens on the Persian treasury. Funds, supplies, and manpower were drawn from across the empire, testing both the tribute system and logistical networks established under Darius. Inscriptions from Susa and Persepolis indicate accelerated requisitions of grain, metal, and manpower during these years. The strain on resources illustrates that even a well-administered empire had practical limits when projecting force across distant regions. Strategically, the wars shifted Persian policy toward consolidation. Xerxes's failure in Greece did not result in immediate territorial loss, but it prompted a reassessment of Western policy. The empire reinforced satrapal oversight in Asia Minor, established garrisons, and pursued diplomacy with remaining Greek city-states along the Anatolian coast. These adjustments reveal an adaptive response to external pressures and underscore the empire's resilience. From a broader perspective, the Persian Wars inaugurated a long-term cultural and political interaction between East and West. Greek historiography, exemplified by Herodotus, framed Persia as both an existential threat and a model of imperial organization, influencing subsequent Greek political thought. Conversely, Persian experiences in the Aegean informed imperial strategies for governance, military coordination, and regional diplomacy. The wars exemplify the dynamic interface of empire and autonomy, logistics and ideology, central authority and local resistance. By the conclusion of the Persian Wars in 479 BCE, Persia retained its western territories in Asia Minor but had suffered a significant setback in projecting power into Greece. The campaigns demonstrated both the empire's reach and the inherent constraints of controlling distant, autonomous regions. Lessons from Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea informed Persian administration for decades to come, emphasizing consolidation, logistical prudence, and strategic accommodation. Defeated abroad, Persia turned inward to consolidate and adapt. Persia's power was not broken, only its ambitions recalibrated. Following the conclusion of the Persian Wars, the Achaemenid Empire undertook a strategic reassessment of its western policies. Although the campaigns into mainland Greece had ended in defeat, the empire's core territories remained intact, its administrative apparatus operational, and its economic resources largely secure. The leadership recognized that continued direct military intervention in Greece carried high risks with limited reward. Instead, Persian policy shifted toward a combination of diplomacy, strategic alliances, and selective support for factions within the Greek world. Under Artaxerxes IR 465 to 424 BCE, this recalibration became particularly evident. Persia engaged with various Greek city-states through financial support, political recognition, and mediation, seeking to influence regional affairs without the direct expenditure of imperial manpower. Records indicate subsidies to Athens and Sparta at different times, enabling Persia to manipulate conflicts such as the Peloponnesian War to its advantage. The empire's approach emphasized pragmatism over ideological conquest. Stability in the West was preferable to costly campaigns, and Persian authority could be projected through networks of client states and alliances. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence supports this pattern. Coins and inscriptions from Western Asia Minor demonstrate continued Persian administrative presence without full military occupation. Satraps maintained oversight of tribute collection and law enforcement, but local Greek elites retained considerable autonomy, allowing the empire to benefit economically and politically without overextending. This dual system of indirect control and formal sovereignty exemplifies the Achaemenid capacity for flexible governance, a hallmark of its long-term durability. Diplomatic engagement also extended to cultural and ceremonial exchanges. Persian recognition of Greek religious festivals, exchanges of gifts, and acknowledgement of local dynasts reinforced legitimacy while cultivating goodwill. The empire's investment in soft power reflected an understanding that influence could be as effectively exercised through economic and cultural channels as through direct force. Herodotus and later sources note that Persian envoys participated in negotiations and acted as guarantors in intercity disputes, a role that enhanced the empire's prestige while minimizing confrontation. By reframing its ambitions, Persia maintained dominance over Anatolia and the eastern Aegean, secured trade routes, and ensured the flow of tribute to the imperial center. This period of recalibration stabilized the empire's western frontier, preserved its resources for domestic development, and allowed for the continuation of monumental projects, administration reforms, and economic expansion at home. The strategy illustrates a sophisticated understanding of power. The empire's authority did not require conquest alone, but could be sustained through diplomacy, economic leverage, and adaptive governance. This era of recalibration gave rise to renewed cultural brilliance at home. Under Darius and Xerxes, empire reached its most intricate form. The reigns of Darius IR 522 to 486 BCE and Xerxes IR 486 to 465 BCE represent the institutional and cultural apex of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius consolidated territorial gains, systematized governance, and introduced mechanisms that ensured long-term stability, while Xerxes focused on monumental architecture, and ceremonial display to project imperial authority. Together, their rule exemplifies the dual character of Persian statecraft: administrative precision combined with ideological and symbolic grandeur. Darius I undertook a comprehensive reorganization of the empire's administration. Satrapies, previously irregular and often unstable, were standardized with clearly defined boundaries, each overseen by a governor responsible for tribute, justice, and military readiness. Herodotus records that Darius divided the empire into 20 provinces, though contemporary inscriptions from Persepolis suggest there may have been closer to 23, reflecting fluid boundaries in frontier regions. Each satrapy paid a fixed tribute to the central treasury, and overseers called the kings I monitored the satraps, ensuring loyalty and preventing corruption. Administrative tablets from Persepolis document detailed accounts of taxation, rations for workers, and allocations for construction projects, illustrating the empire's bureaucratic sophistication. Coinage reforms under Darius further strengthened economic cohesion. The gold daric and silver siglos standardized monetary exchange across the empire, facilitating trade and the payment of tribute. Archaeological finds of these coins from Lydia to Bactria demonstrate widespread acceptance, indicating both the practicality and authority of Darius's economic policies. Beyond currency, the introduction of uniform weights, measures, and legal procedures in satrapies created a predictable and integrated administrative environment that allowed both local and imperial interests to coexist. Darius also codified infrastructure improvements that reinforced cohesion. Roads, canals, and irrigation projects were systematically maintained, linking distant regions to the imperial center. The Suez Canal initiative, though limited in scale compared to modern engineering, facilitated navigation between the Nile and Red Sea, improving trade and military mobility. Royal inscriptions emphasize Darius's role in creating order, presenting him not merely as a conqueror but as a divinely sanctioned administrator ensuring asha, or cosmic and political order. Xerxes I, while inheriting the administrative framework of his father, concentrated on monumental expression of imperial power. The construction of Persepolis's Apodana, grand audience halls, and terraces expanded the ceremonial center into a symbol of empire-wide authority. Reliefs depicting delegations from subject nations, detailed in stone, reflect both artistic mastery and political ideology, portraying a world united under Persian rule. Inscriptions commemorate the labor of artisans, the mobilization of resources, and the king's divine sanction, reinforcing the symbolic connection between architecture and authority. Archaeological evidence confirms the diversity of materials and techniques employed, from timber imported from Lebanon to gold inlays, demonstrating the empire's logistical and economic capacity. Darius and Xerxes also pursued religious and ideological unification. Royal inscriptions invoke Ahura Mazda as the guarantor of kingship and order. Fire altars and ceremonial complexes constructed during their reigns reinforced Zoroastrian ethical principles, embedding them within the political and social fabric of the empire. The combination of ritual, architecture, and bureaucracy created a layered system in which legitimacy derived simultaneously from divine sanction, administrative competence, and visible monuments. Militarily, the reigns of Darius and Xerxes reflect both projection of power and limits imposed by geography. Darius subdued rebellious provinces, launched campaigns in Thrace and along the Indus, and reinforced naval presence in the Aegean. Xerxes, as previously noted, expanded these campaigns into Greece, culminating in the Persian Wars. While these military endeavors ultimately revealed constraints in projecting force over distant regions, they also reinforced internal control and ensured tributary compliance across the empire. The period under these kings illustrates a sophisticated equilibrium between administration, economy, and symbolism. Darius's codification of satrapies and economic systems created a durable bureaucratic core, while Xerxes's monumental constructions projected imperial authority both to subjects and rivals. Inscriptions, archaeological remains, and administrative tablets all converge to indicate that this era represents the functional and ideological high point of Achaemenid Persia. By the mid-5th century BCE, the empire had reached its greatest structural complexity. Its provinces were well-regulated, its economy standardized, and its ceremonial centers monumentalized. The Achaemenid state demonstrated that an empire could combine vast territorial reach with administrative cohesion and ideological coherence. But as kings changed, so too did priorities, from expansion to preservation. In Persia, language became the architecture of empire. The Achaemenid Empire's administrative complexity relied on a sophisticated linguistic framework. Governance over millions of subjects speaking dozens of languages demanded a system that could transmit orders, record transactions, and codify legal norms across vast distances. The Persians accomplished this through the coordinated use of three primary languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Imperial Aramaic. Each served a specific administrative, ceremonial, or communicative function, reflecting both practicality and the projection of imperial authority. Old Persian, the language of the royal court, was employed primarily in monumental inscriptions and declarations. The Behistun inscription of Darius I, carved into a cliff face in western Iran, exemplifies this use. Written in three languages, Old Persian conveys royal ideology, genealogical legitimacy, and justification for the king's authority. Its form and vocabulary were deliberately structured, emphasizing clarity, conciseness, and the divine sanction of the great king. This language, though limited in everyday use, symbolized central authority and ideological coherence, reinforcing the king's presence across the empire. Elamite functioned as the administrative medium for record-keeping and bureaucratic communication. Persepolis tablets, hundreds of clay tablets excavated in the early 20th century, are primarily written in Elamite. They record transactions of food, textiles, and labor for construction and ceremonial purposes, detailing allocations for workers, military units, and provincial officials. These tablets illustrate a highly standardized bureaucratic practice. Entries include the names of officials, quantities of goods, and precise dates. By centralizing records in Elamite, the empire ensured continuity and uniformity, creating a coherent archive that could be referenced for auditing, taxation, and legal purposes. Aramaic, meanwhile, served as the lingua franca of the empire. Already widespread across the Near East, Imperial Aramaic allowed communication between provinces with diverse linguistic backgrounds. Letters, contracts, and decrees issued in Aramaic facilitated coordination among satraps, merchants, and local administrators. Archaeological finds from sites such as Babylon, Bactria, and Elephantine demonstrate that Aramaic enabled both official governance and practical commerce. Its adoption exemplifies the Achaemenid principle of pragmatic integration. The empire recognized the communicative advantages of an existing language rather than imposing a foreign tongue on all subjects. Art, parallel to language, functioned as a unifying instrument of imperial identity. Reliefs at Persepolis depict delegations from subject nations presenting tribute, illustrating the empire's diversity under centralized rule. These works are not merely decorative. They encode information about hierarchy, protocol, and the extent of imperial control. The repetition of motifs, standardized dress, and symbolic gestures reinforce both order and the ideology of Asha, cosmic and political order. Reliefs were strategically placed in ceremonial halls, ensuring that visitors and officials alike were continuously reminded of the empire's reach and coherence. The integration of language and art reflects a systemic approach to imperial cohesion. Administrative tablets, inscriptions, and reliefs all intersected to produce a network of knowledge and representation. Records ensured the proper allocation of resources. Inscriptions legitimized the king, and art communicated authority visually across cultural boundaries. This triad allowed an empire composed of disparate ethnicities, religions, and economies to function as a unified system. Analysis of Persepolis tablets reveals additional operational insights. Standardized notation, repeated formulas, and consistent record hierarchies indicate that bureaucrats were trained to interpret and produce documents reliably. This professionalization suggests that literacy and administration were tightly controlled, further stabilizing imperial operations. Art, meanwhile, codified hierarchical relationships and ceremonial norms, serving as a visual supplement to textual authority. The combination of textual precision and artistic symbolism created redundancy, ensuring that the empire's message was clear, regardless of linguistic or cultural background. The linguistic and artistic system also facilitated long-term memory and continuity. Administrative records could be referenced decades after their creation, while inscriptions and reliefs preserved ideological messages for generations. This capacity allowed successive rulers to maintain institutional consistency, integrate new territories, and reinforce legitimacy without the need for constant coercion. By coordinating language, bureaucracy, and art, the Achaemenid state maintained cohesion across a territory of unprecedented scale. These tools allowed Darius and Xerxes to standardize administration, communicate authority, and visually project power. Such integration exemplifies the empire's reliance on systematic structures rather than solely on military enforcement, enabling stability over vast temporal and spatial dimensions. Even as the empire matured, internal tensions began to surface. Beneath the polished order, cracks began to appear. Despite the Achaemenid Empire's administrative sophistication and monumental expression of authority, the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE saw a series of regional disturbances that revealed structural vulnerabilities. Provinces that had long been held in relative stability began asserting autonomy, exposing the limitations of centralized control over culturally and geographically diverse territories. Rebellions in Egypt, Babylonia, and Bactria illustrate both the resilience of local identities and the strain on imperial governance. Egypt, a vital economic and symbolic province, was frequently restive under Persian rule. Historical accounts, corroborated by Egyptian inscriptions and archaeological evidence from the Nile Delta, indicate uprisings in 486 BCE following Darius I's death and again under Artaxerxes I. These revolts were often fueled by resentment toward foreign administration, high taxation, and interference with local religious institutions. While Persian satraps eventually suppressed these uprisings through military campaigns and punitive measures, the frequency of resistance suggests that Egypt's loyalty was conditional and dependent on effective local management rather than inherent allegiance. Babylonia, another crucial region for imperial resources, similarly experienced intermittent rebellion. Babylonian cities leveraged the empire's reliance on tribute and bureaucracy to negotiate terms or temporarily assert independence. Economic stress, such as crop failures or delayed tribute collection, sometimes catalyzed unrest. Clay tablets from the period record correspondence between satraps and the central treasury, detailing military expenditures and local insubordination. These documents reveal that Persian administrators were forced to respond repeatedly to challenges, diverting attention and resources from broader imperial projects. Bactria, located on the empire's eastern frontier, exemplifies the difficulties of governing distant, militarized provinces. Its rugged terrain, combined with culturally distinct populations and access to trade routes connecting Central Asia and India, made full control challenging. Archaeological findings, including fortifications and records of localized governance, indicate periodic uprisings, often coinciding with dynastic succession crises in the imperial center. Persian reliance on local elites for administration and military levies occasionally backfired, as Bactrian leaders exploited the empire's preoccupation elsewhere to assert autonomy. Analysis of these revolts demonstrates a broader structural tension. The very mechanisms that allowed Persia to integrate vast territories, satrapal governance, delegated authority, and flexible local administration, also created opportunities for fragmentation. When central authority weakened, even temporarily, regional actors could exploit gaps, highlighting the delicate balance between control and autonomy. These pressures reveal that, while the Achaemenid system was effective in peacetime, it required continual reinforcement and oversight to prevent systemic decay. The frequency and geographic spread of rebellions indicate that Persia's empire, though monumental in scale, was not invulnerable. Each revolt, whether in the Nile Valley, Mesopotamia, or Central Asia, demanded a combination of military, economic, and diplomatic responses. The cumulative effect strained imperial resources, slowed projects at Persepolis and other ceremonial centers, and forced the administration to prioritize containment over expansion. Even under capable rulers, maintaining cohesion across diverse populations imposed persistent structural stress. From a broader perspective, these disturbances prefigured the empire's vulnerability to external conquest. Internal instability reduced the operational flexibility of Persian forces and compromised strategic decision-making. Provinces that had previously contributed troops, resources, and logistical support could no longer be fully relied upon, diminishing the empire's capacity to project power. This fragility would become decisive when Macedonian armies under Alexander approached 2 centuries later. Ultimately, the late Achaemenid revolts illustrate a critical dynamic in imperial history: the interplay between local autonomy and central authority. Persia's administrative brilliance could maintain stability for decades, but latent tensions persisted beneath the surface. Rebellions in Egypt, Babylonia, and Bactria signal the beginning of structural erosion, providing insight into how even the most organized empires can face challenges when governance relies on negotiated compliance rather than absolute control. When Alexander's armies appeared, Persia was no longer the force it once was. By 334 BCE, the empire that had once conquered Babylon now faced invasion from Macedonia. In the decades following the late Achaemenid revolts, Persia had stabilized under the reigns of Artaxerxes II and Artaxerxes III, but internal weaknesses persisted. While satraps maintained administrative routines and tribute collection continued, the empire had yet to recover the full cohesion and vigor of the Darius and Xerxes era. To the west, Macedonia had emerged as a formidable power under Philip II, whose military reforms and diplomatic maneuvers transformed a previously marginal kingdom into a dominant regional force. Philip's unification of Greece under Macedonian hegemony created the conditions for sustained military campaigns beyond the Aegean, setting the stage for a confrontation with Persia that would redefine the ancient world. Philip's military innovations were critical in shaping the Macedonian threat. He professionalized the infantry through the phalanx formation, integrating long spears, coordinated maneuvers, and disciplined drills to create a cohesive and highly adaptable force. Cavalry units were similarly restructured, providing mobility and shock capability that complemented the phalanx. These reforms ensured that Macedonia could project power effectively against larger but less coordinated opponents, including the Persian satrapies of Asia Minor. Moreover, Philip's combination of military skill and political diplomacy secured the loyalty of key Greek city-states, allowing him to concentrate resources on external campaigns rather than internal disputes. Alexander inherited not only Philip's army but also a broader strategic rationale for Persian conquest. His education under Aristotle provided him with a deep understanding of geography, political systems, and historical precedent, while the cultural memory of Persian-Greek conflict offered both ideological justification and tactical insight. By 334 BCE, Alexander positioned himself as the avenger of earlier Greek defeats, invoking the Persian Wars as a historical precedent, while also pursuing pragmatic goals of wealth, trade control, and territorial expansion. The Macedonian invasion was carefully planned to exploit Persia's structural weaknesses. Alexander targeted the western satrapies first, recognizing that securing Asia Minor would provide a secure base for deeper campaigns into the heart of the empire. Logistical considerations guided the route: proximity to Greek allies, access to harbors for resupply, and navigable terrain for both infantry and cavalry. Archaeological evidence along the Aegean coast indicates the construction of supply depots and temporary fortifications, underscoring the deliberate nature of the Macedonian advance. Persia's response, by contrast, was hampered by bureaucratic inertia and fragmented leadership. Satraps controlled large territories but operated with considerable autonomy, making rapid coordination difficult. Communication across the royal road system remained effective for routine administration but was insufficient for responding to the sudden mobility and concentrated force of Alexander's army. While some Persian generals recognized the threat and attempted preemptive mobilization, their forces were dispersed, and internal political rivalries slowed unified action. This juxtaposition of Macedonian cohesion against Persian diffusion framed the early stages of the conflict. Macedonian forces relied on disciplined organization, rapid movement, and integrated logistics, whereas Persian forces depended on numerical superiority, local levies, and regional loyalty. The contrast revealed the evolving dynamics of empire and warfare. Size and resources alone were no longer sufficient against a highly trained, strategically focused opponent. From an analytical perspective, the prelude to Alexander's invasion demonstrates the intersection of structural vulnerability and external pressure. Persia's long-term stability had masked latent weaknesses: overextended territories, dependence on satrapal initiative, and uneven military readiness. Alexander's campaign capitalized on these systemic gaps, transforming local strengths and weaknesses into decisive strategic outcomes. By the spring of 334 BCE, the stage was set. The Macedonian army, combining veteran troops, innovative tactics, and strategic foresight, crossed into Asia Minor. The empire that had once absorbed revolts in Egypt, Babylonia, and Bactria now confronted an opponent whose combination of agility, cohesion, and ambition would challenge every assumption of Persian dominance. The invasion would test not only Persia's armies, but its very identity. From the Hellespont to Persepolis, Alexander carved a path through the heart of empire. Alexander's campaigns against Persia, beginning in 334 BCE, represented a systematic dismantling of Achaemenid power across Asia Minor, Syria, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Unlike prior Greek confrontations, these campaigns were characterized by concentrated military strategy, logistical precision, and rapid maneuvering. Sources such as Arrian, Curtius Rufus, and Babylonian astronomical diaries provide detailed records of battles, troop movements, and administrative consequences, allowing modern historians to reconstruct both Macedonian and Persian perspectives. The first major engagement, the Battle of the Granicus River, occurred in May 334 BCE. Alexander crossed the Hellespont with approximately 35,000 troops, facing a Persian force composed of satrapal levies, Greek mercenaries, and cavalry units estimated at 20,000 to 30,000. The river's geography favored the defenders, yet Alexander's tactical innovation, a concentrated cavalry assault on the Persian flank, disrupted command cohesion and forced a retreat. Persian satraps were wounded or killed, demonstrating that local leadership, while regionally capable, lacked the integrated strategic control necessary to counter Alexander's coordinated forces. The defeat at Granicus opened Western Asia Minor to Macedonian occupation and demonstrated the empire's vulnerability in frontier satrapies. Following Granicus, Alexander advanced along the Anatolian coast, systematically securing cities through a combination of siege warfare, negotiation, and incorporation of local elites. The capture of Halicarnassus and Sardis illustrates this dual approach. Military action neutralized resistance, while strategic alliances co-opted local authority. Archaeological evidence, including fortification damage and inscriptions, supports accounts of city-level resistance and subsequent incorporation into Alexander's administrative framework, which often retained elements of Persian governance to stabilize newly acquired territories. In 333 BCE, the campaign reached southern Anatolia, culminating in the Battle of Issus. Darius III personally commanded a force reported by Arrian at approximately 50,000 to 100,000, though modern estimates suggest closer to 40,000 to 60,000. Alexander's 30,000-strong army leveraged terrain advantage along the Pinarus River, concentrating the phalanx in the center and deploying cavalry to outflank the Persian wings. Darius's army, though numerically superior, suffered from coordination difficulties among satrapal contingents and mercenary units. The resulting defeat forced Darius to abandon his family and treasury, signaling a severe blow to imperial legitimacy and morale. Issus illustrates the structural challenge faced by Persia. Disparate provincial forces, though individually competent, struggled to operate under unified command when confronted by a highly disciplined and mobile opponent. After consolidating Anatolia and Syria, Alexander moved into Phoenicia and Egypt, encountering both strategic and symbolic objectives. The submission of coastal cities along the eastern Mediterranean enabled control of naval routes and ensured secure supply lines for further campaigns into Mesopotamia. In Egypt, Alexander was received as a liberator from Persian rule, and he founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BCE as both a military base and cultural center. These actions reflect a continuity of administrative pragmatism. Alexander adapted local structures to maintain order while projecting his authority, a strategy reminiscent of Persian governance but executed with centralized command. The climactic confrontation occurred at Gaugamela in October 331 BCE. Darius assembled the largest recorded Persian army, with estimates ranging from 80,000 to over 100,000 troops, including infantry, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants. Alexander's forces, though smaller, achieved tactical superiority through the use of oblique formations, concentrated phalanx advances, and flexible cavalry maneuvers. Darius's attempt to envelop the Macedonian center was countered by decisive strikes on his flanks, forcing his retreat and effectively ending organized Persian resistance. Babylonian astronomical diaries confirm the timing and sequence of events, while archaeological surveys of the Gaugamela plain corroborate the scale and terrain of the engagement. Following Gaugamela, Alexander advanced rapidly into Mesopotamia, capturing key cities including Babylon, Susa, and ultimately Persepolis. The seizure of Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, was both a strategic and symbolic act. Alexander's occupation secured immense wealth, administrative records, and material assets, while the eventual burning of the palace complex, as recorded by Curtius Rufus and supported by archaeological remains, marked a definitive end to Persian ceremonial hegemony. Though accounts debate whether the destruction was calculated or impulsive, the effect was unambiguous. The era of Achaemenid ceremonial and ideological dominance had concluded. Analysis of these campaigns highlights several persistent themes. The Persian military relied heavily on provincial levies and satrapal coordination, which proved inadequate against a centralized, professional, and highly mobile opponent. Strategic dispersal of forces and reliance on local loyalty limited the empire's ability to respond dynamically. Alexander, by contrast, combined tactical innovation with logistical foresight, integrating supply lines, intelligence, and rapid mobility to exploit Persian structural weaknesses. The Macedonian conquest did not erase the administrative and cultural foundations established by the Achaemenids. In Babylon, Persepolis, and Susa, Alexander retained elements of Persian bureaucracy, tax systems, and even satrapal oversight. This pragmatic approach reflects recognition that the institutional cohesion created by the Achaemenids remained valuable for controlling a vast empire. Moreover, the integration of Persian elites into Alexander's administration illustrates continuity, as well as transformation, highlighting the durability of imperial structures even under conquest. By the conclusion of these campaigns, Persia had lost its political and military independence, yet the institutional, economic, and cultural frameworks of the empire persisted. The Achaemenid legacy endured not only in administrative systems but also in the symbolic and ceremonial vocabulary that Alexander adapted to consolidate his own authority. As Persepolis burned, a chapter in world history closed, but its legacy endured. The great king's fall marked not just a man's death, but an era's extinction. Following the decisive defeat at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Darius III's authority rapidly unraveled. Retreating eastward, he attempted to regroup his forces in Media and Parthia, hoping to muster loyal contingents from distant satrapies. Sources such as Arrian and Diodorus describe his movements across Ecbatana and Persepolis, documenting both the logistical challenges and the erosion of morale within his ranks. The empire that had once extended from the Indus to the Aegean now appeared fragmented, its cohesion dependent on the personal command of a king whose legitimacy was increasingly questioned. Darius's flight revealed underlying structural vulnerabilities. Satraps, responsible for local defense and governance, faced the practical dilemma of choosing between loyalty to a faltering central authority and survival under the advancing Macedonian army. Bessus, satrap of Bactria and a distant relative of Darius, seized the opportunity to assert control, detaining the king and attempting to claim the title of Great King himself. This act of betrayal underscores a persistent tension within the Achaemenid system. Delegated authority enabled efficient administration, but it also permitted opportunistic defection during crises. Darius's death, recorded in 330 BCE near Hecatompylos, was the culmination of these internal fractures. Bessus's forces executed him, ending the dynastic line of Achaemenid rulers. Contemporary sources emphasize both the personal tragedy and the symbolic import of the event. The fall of the great king represented the definitive termination of centralized Persian sovereignty. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence, including funerary sites and royal inscriptions, corroborates the sudden cessation of formal Achaemenid governance in the empire's eastern provinces. From a structural perspective, Darius's collapse illustrates the limits of imperial resilience in the absence of strong centralized command. Despite centuries of bureaucratic organization, logistical networks, and military infrastructure, the Achaemenid Empire could not withstand a combination of external pressure and internal fragmentation. Regional elites prioritized self-preservation, and distant provinces could not be effectively coordinated to mount a unified defense. The empire's scale, which had once been a source of strength, became a liability under rapid strategic stress. Yet the fall of Darius did not signal the disappearance of Persian civilization. Administrative practices, economic systems, and cultural expressions persisted under Macedonian oversight and later Seleucid governance. Satrapal structures, roads, and tax mechanisms remained operational, demonstrating that while political authority shifted, institutional and cultural continuity endured. The Achaemenid legacy provided a framework that subsequent rulers would adapt, preserving the empire's innovations even as sovereignty changed hands. Darius III's demise thus represents both an endpoint and a transitional moment. Militarily and politically, Achaemenid Persia ceased to exist as an independent entity, yet its systems of governance, economic integration, and cultural cohesion continued to influence the Near East for generations. The great king's fall marks the final chapter of Achaemenid dominion, but not the extinction of the civilization that had created it. Yet Persian civilization would not vanish, it would transform. Under Greek rule, Persian systems endured quietly in new forms. Following the collapse of Achaemenid sovereignty, Alexander the Great established a network of satrapies across the former Persian territories, preserving much of the administrative framework that had underpinned imperial governance for centuries. After his death in 323 BCE, these regions fell under the control of his generals, and the Seleucid Empire, founded by Seleucus I Nicator, inherited the eastern Achaemenid lands. While politically Hellenistic, the Seleucid rulers relied heavily on pre-existing Persian institutions to maintain order, extract tribute, and manage diverse populations across vast territories. Satrapal administration remained central to governance. The Seleucids retained regional governors, often blending Greek appointees with local Persian elites who had previously held office under the Achaemenids. This continuity allowed for a smoother transition of authority, minimizing resistance in provinces accustomed to hierarchical oversight. In Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana, administrative practices documented on clay tablets show the persistence of record-keeping, taxation, and rationing procedures remarkably similar to those of the late Achaemenid period. These records reveal a deliberate strategy. By maintaining established bureaucracies, Seleucid rulers could focus on strategic challenges and military campaigns rather than constructing entirely new administrative structures. Economically, Persian systems of tribute and trade were preserved, though now adapted to Hellenistic networks. The royal road and other key routes remained active conduits for goods, while coinage was gradually Hellenized. Nevertheless, the basic logic of standardized currency, taxation, and provincial contributions continued to echo Achaemenid practice. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions and administrative tablets from Seleucid-controlled Mesopotamia, demonstrates that the empire's fiscal organization depended on structures developed under Darius and Xerxes. The retention of these mechanisms underscores the efficiency and resilience of Persian institutional design. Religious and cultural policies similarly reflected continuity. While Greek culture and governance were introduced, local Persian religious practices persisted. Temples, Fire altars and local cults continued to function alongside Hellenistic institutions, and in many cases, Greek rulers adopted Persian ceremonial practices to legitimize their authority. This syncretism facilitated acceptance of foreign rule while preserving the cultural foundations that had long unified the empire's diverse populations. Inscriptions from Seleucid sites often combine Greek and Aramaic languages, indicating practical bilingual administration rooted in Persian precedent. Militarily, the Seleucid approach also reflected adaptation of Persian models. Provincial garrisons were established along key routes and strategic cities, echoing Achaemenid strategies for maintaining control over distant satrapies. Local levies were incorporated into the broader Hellenistic army, demonstrating the continued utility of regional forces in supplementing central military power. These practices highlight how Persian administrative foresight, integrating local authority with central oversight, remained influential even under a new ruling dynasty. The Seleucid integration demonstrates that political conquest does not necessarily erase institutional legacy. Persian bureaucratic, economic, and cultural systems provided a durable framework that could be adapted to new ruling contexts. By retaining these structures, the Seleucid rulers ensured continuity of governance, stability in provincial administration, and the effective extraction of resources from a complex and heterogeneous empire. This continuity not only facilitated the functioning of the Seleucid state but also preserved the foundations of Persian civilization for centuries to come. In sum, the Seleucid Empire illustrates how Persian institutions could survive under foreign dominion, preserving administrative sophistication, economic integration, and cultural structures. The resilience of these systems underscores the enduring influence of the Achaemenid model, demonstrating that while dynasties changed, the civilizational core of Persia persisted. That continuity laid the foundation for Persia's resurgence. The Parthians revived the spirit of Persia in a new imperial language. Following the gradual decline of Seleucid control in the eastern territories of the former Achaemenid Empire, the Arsacid family established the Parthian Empire around 247 BCE. The Parthians, originating from the northeastern Iranian region of Parthia, capitalized on the weakening of Hellenistic authority to assert political independence, eventually controlling vast territories from the Euphrates to the Indus. Unlike their Seleucid predecessors, the Arsacids fused Iranian traditions with lingering Hellenistic influences, creating a hybrid political and cultural identity that drew legitimacy from both Persian precedent and contemporary Greco-Roman models. The Parthian state maintained several institutional features reminiscent of the Achaemenid and Seleucid administrations. Satrapal structures were adapted into semi-autonomous regional governorships, allowing local rulers significant latitude while still contributing tribute and military support to the central king. This flexibility proved essential in a landscape of diverse populations, from Mesopotamian city-states to nomadic groups on the northeastern frontiers. Inscriptions and coinage from Parthian cities demonstrate the continuation of Persian bureaucratic principles. The collection of tribute, maintenance of roads, and governance through local intermediaries all reflect long-standing Achaemenid practices adapted to the context of Parthian political realities. Economically, the Parthians controlled vital trade routes connecting the Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and India, effectively reviving Persia's transcontinental commerce. The Silk Road flourished under their rule, facilitated by infrastructure such as caravanserais and fortified settlements. Parthian coinage, often inscribed with Greek letters alongside Iranian titles, illustrates both continuity with Hellenistic economic systems and the assertion of a distinct imperial identity. Archaeological finds in Hekatompelos, Nisa, and Ctesiphon highlight the blending of Greek artistic motifs with Iranian iconography, signaling a deliberate cultural synthesis that reinforced legitimacy across multi-ethnic populations. The military organization of the Parthians further demonstrates adaptation of Persian strategies to new conditions. Heavy cavalry, particularly the armored cataphracts, became central to their defense and expansion, drawing on both Iranian cavalry traditions and influences from Hellenistic warfare. The decentralized structure of Parthian command allowed regional leaders to mobilize local forces quickly while supporting central objectives. This mirrored the earlier Achaemenid reliance on provincial levies, but with greater emphasis on mobility and the exploitation of terrain, reflecting lessons learned from centuries of imperial administration and warfare. Cultural and religious policies also contributed to imperial cohesion. Zoroastrianism remained influential, alongside syncretic incorporation of Hellenistic deities and rituals. Fire temples and royal inscriptions reinforced the king's authority while integrating multiple traditions, fostering a shared imperial identity. Such strategies emphasized continuity with the Achaemenid legacy, demonstrating that the Parthians positioned themselves not merely as conquerors, but as inheritors and adapters of Persian civilization. Despite political decentralization, the Parthian Empire successfully projected power westward into Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean, maintaining a balance between local autonomy and central authority. Diplomatic correspondence with Rome, documented in surviving inscriptions and classical sources, reflects a sophisticated understanding of international relations, showing that Persia's legacy of strategic administration continued to inform imperial conduct. By blending administrative continuity, military innovation, economic integration, and cultural synthesis, the Parthians revived Persian civilization in a form suited to the post-Alexandrian world. Their hybrid Greco-Iranian empire preserved the institutional and ideological foundations of the Achaemenids, while adapting to the challenges of Hellenistic and nomadic pressures. This period demonstrates that Persia's civilizational core remained resilient, capable of renewal even under new dynasties and shifting geopolitical landscapes. Centuries later, the Sasanian dynasty would renew that legacy with fresh vigor. From the ashes of the Achaemenids rose another empire, equally ambitious, equally Persian. The Sasanian dynasty, founded by Ardashir I in 224 CE, marked the formal restoration of Persian imperial authority after centuries of Parthian and Hellenistic influence. Drawing explicitly on Achaemenid models, the Sasanians sought to consolidate central power, standardize administration, and project a distinctly Iranian identity across a territory stretching from the Euphrates to the Indus. Their rise represents both political revival and civilizational continuity, reaffirming Persia's role as a central actor in Eurasian history. Sasanian governance reflected lessons inherited from prior dynasties. Provincial administration was centralized under royal oversight, with local officials accountable to the court, yet regions retained customary autonomy to manage local affairs. Inscriptions, such as those at Nakshi Rustam, and coinage from the early Sasanian period reveal an emphasis on the divine legitimacy of kingship, echoing Achaemenid practices of portraying rulers as divinely sanctioned. These policies reinforced both bureaucratic efficiency and ideological cohesion, demonstrating a conscious revival of Persian statecraft. Economically, the Sasanians revitalized trade routes and agricultural infrastructure, ensuring continuity with both Achaemenid and Parthian practices. Caravan networks linked Mesopotamia, Iran, and Central Asia, while irrigation projects maintained the fertility of key river valleys. The empire's control over strategic passes and frontier regions enabled both defense and the collection of tribute, illustrating an enduring reliance on territorial integration to sustain imperial resources. Archaeological surveys of cities such as Ctesiphon and Bishapur reveal the scale of urban planning and economic organization inherited from previous Persian administrations. Culturally, the Sasanians emphasized Zoroastrianism as a state religion, institutionalizing fire temples and royal patronage, while simultaneously absorbing regional traditions. Art and architecture, including palace complexes and rock reliefs, combined indigenous motifs with elements reminiscent of Achaemenid monumental style. This visual continuity reinforced claims of legitimacy and linked the new dynasty to Persia's historical legacy. The Sasanians also maintained literacy in Middle Persian alongside Aramaic for administrative purposes, continuing the multilingual approach established under the Achaemenids and Seleucids. Militarily, the Sasanians inherited and refined the strategies of their predecessors. Heavy cavalry, fortified frontier cities, and rapid mobilization reflected a synthesis of Achaemenid organizational principles with innovations adapted to contemporary threats, particularly Rome. Conflicts along the western frontier required efficient administration, strategic reserves, and coordination across diverse provinces, demonstrating that Persian models of empire could be effectively revived in a later historical context. The Sasanian restoration illustrates that Persian civilization was not contingent on a single dynasty. While political authority had shifted repeatedly over centuries, the institutional, economic, and cultural foundations laid by the Achaemenids persisted, enabling successive dynasties to assert control and cultivate legitimacy. By consciously linking themselves to earlier Persian empires, the Sasanians reinforced a sense of continuity and historical identity that would influence the region long after their fall in the mid-7th century CE. Persia's legacy extended far beyond its fall, influencing empires yet unborn. Behind the empire's grandeur lay the quiet power of scribes. The functioning of the Persian Empire rested not only on kings and armies but also on an extensive and highly organized bureaucracy. Administrative efficiency allowed rulers to govern an empire spanning millions of square kilometers, incorporating diverse peoples, languages, and economies. Evidence from Persepolis fortification tablets, Babylonian cuneiform records, and administrative inscriptions provides a detailed picture of how the Achaemenids structured taxation, labor, and legal oversight to maintain control over such a vast territory. Satrapal administration formed the backbone of imperial governance. Each province, or satrapy, was overseen by a governor responsible for implementing royal directives, collecting tribute, and ensuring internal security. Records indicate that satraps were required to submit detailed reports on agricultural production, resource allocation, and labor contributions. Clerks and scribes meticulously documented these transactions on clay tablets, creating a standardized archival system that allowed the central government to monitor provincial activity. This practice minimized corruption, enhanced accountability, and enabled the empire to respond swiftly to emerging issues, from economic shortfalls to regional unrest. Tribute collection exemplifies the integration of bureaucracy with economic management. Each satrapy was assessed a fixed quota, often measured in silver, gold, grain, or livestock. Persepolis tablets detail allocations of food and textiles for royal households, construction projects, and military logistics, demonstrating a system of resource redistribution designed to support both central authority and imperial projects. Archaeologists have noted the remarkable precision of these records, which accounted for daily rations and seasonal variations, reflecting the sophistication of Achaemenid administration. The use of multiple recording languages, including Elamite, Old Persian, and Aramaic, facilitated communication across a multi-ethnic empire while preserving the reliability of documentation. Legal administration was closely intertwined with bureaucratic oversight. Satraps held judicial authority within their provinces, adjudicating disputes, enforcing contracts, and overseeing criminal matters. Evidence from Babylonian and Aramaic papyri shows that local customs were respected, provided they did not conflict with imperial law or royal decrees. This balance between central regulation and local practice allowed diverse communities to maintain continuity in social and economic life while contributing to the cohesion of the empire. It also demonstrates a pragmatic approach to governance. Persian rulers emphasized compliance and order rather than attempting to homogenize cultural practices. Communication networks reinforced the bureaucracy's effectiveness. The royal road and its auxiliary routes allowed rapid transmission of messages, tax records, and orders between the capital and provincial centers. Relay stations and royal messengers ensured that information traveled efficiently, enabling the administration to coordinate labor, military deployments, and fiscal matters over vast distances. This integration of logistics and documentation highlights the interdependence of infrastructure and bureaucratic control, a key factor in sustaining imperial cohesion. The daily work of scribes, clerks, and administrators formed a silent but essential mechanism of imperial power. Their meticulous record-keeping preserved continuity across generations, ensured equitable taxation, and facilitated the construction of monumental projects such as Persepolis. In many respects, the empire's strength derived less from the size of its armies than from the reliability of its administrative apparatus. The precision and adaptability of these bureaucratic systems also laid the groundwork for later Persian states, including the Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian empires. By standardizing administration, integrating taxation, and codifying legal procedures, the Achaemenid bureaucracy enabled the empire to function efficiently despite geographic, cultural, and linguistic diversity. These structures transformed abstract authority into practical governance, allowing Persia to manage a complex society with consistency and durability. These structures supported a society of remarkable diversity. Persian society functioned through balance, hierarchy tempered by tolerance. Persian society under the Achaemenid Empire was stratified yet flexible, structured to integrate a vast array of ethnicities, professions, and social classes. At the apex stood the king, whose authority was reinforced by divine sanction, royal court officials, and a network of nobles. Satraps and provincial elites exercised administrative and military control, managing taxation, law, and local governance. These upper classes benefited from proximity to power, enjoying privileges such as land grants, access to the court, and participation in ceremonial events. Yet their authority was contingent upon loyalty to the king and effective administration of their provinces. Beneath, the nobility, artisans, merchants, and scribes formed a critical middle tier in Persian society. Artisans worked on monumental construction projects, palace decorations, and state-sponsored crafts, often coordinated through central administrative offices. Merchants facilitated trade across internal and transcontinental routes, while scribes maintained the empire's archives, ensuring continuity and accountability. This professional class supported both the economic and bureaucratic machinery of the empire, linking production, commerce, and governance. Inscriptions and Persepolis fortification tablets reveal the organization of labor, payment in rations or coin, and the systematic recording of contributions, demonstrating the structured integration of these social roles into imperial operations. At the base of the hierarchy were agricultural workers, herders, and other laborers who formed the backbone of the empire's resource economy. Many were organized into local or state-controlled systems, contributing goods and services to support satrapal and royal projects. Archaeological evidence from rural estates and administrative tablets indicates that these laborers were often bound by obligations to the state or temple complexes but retained communal autonomy in daily life. Their productivity underpinned the empire's wealth, ensuring both local sustenance and the maintenance of infrastructure across Persia's extensive territory. The treatment of conquered peoples reflected a pragmatic approach designed to maintain stability. The Achaemenids generally respected local customs, religious practices, and languages, provided that tribute was paid and order maintained. In Egypt, Babylon, and Anatolia, local officials were frequently retained, and indigenous elites could participate in administration. Aramaic served as a common administrative language to facilitate communication, demonstrating the empire's capacity to integrate diverse populations without imposing cultural uniformity. This policy of tolerance was both practical and strategic, reducing the likelihood of rebellion and fostering loyalty to the imperial center. Religious and cultural plurality complemented the social hierarchy. Communities maintained their traditional rituals while acknowledging the authority of the king, often through the sponsorship of temples, festivals, and civic works. Zoroastrian principles, emphasizing order, asha, and communal responsibility, provided a moral framework that guided governance and social expectation, reinforcing cohesion among different classes and ethnic groups. Artistic depictions in Persepolis reliefs illustrate this diversity, portraying delegations from across the empire presenting tribute while maintaining distinctive attire and ceremonial practices. The interdependence of social classes ensured that the empire functioned efficiently. Nobility provided political oversight and military leadership. Artisans, merchants, and scribes enabled administration and economic activity, and laborers supplied the essential resources for both. Conquered populations were incorporated into the system, contributing skills, taxes, and manpower while retaining identifiable cultural practices. Such organization created a durable human framework capable of sustaining imperial authority across regions of remarkable geographic and cultural diversity. Persian society demonstrates how hierarchical structure, professional specialization, and strategic tolerance combined to create an effective and stable civilization. By balancing authority with accommodation, the empire maintained order and productivity, allowing the Achaemenid model of governance to endure long after its political institutions were challenged by external conquest. That human tapestry extended to religion and ritual. In religion, as in politics, Persia's strength lay in coexistence. Religious practice in the Achaemenid Empire combined official endorsement of Zoroastrian principles with pragmatic tolerance of local cults and traditions. The great king was often portrayed as divinely sanctioned, a representative of Ahura Mazda on earth, embodying the Zoroastrian ideal of order, Asha, over chaos, Druj. Inscriptions and reliefs at Persepolis emphasize this cosmic authority, linking the king's political actions with a moral framework that justified both taxation and military campaigns. However, while Zoroastrianism informed imperial ideology, the empire did not enforce religious uniformity, allowing local populations to maintain their traditions and rituals. One of the clearest examples of Persian religious policy is the Edict of Cyrus, circa 539 BCE, which permitted exiled peoples, notably the Judeans, to return to their homelands and rebuild temples. Archaeological evidence from Babylon and Judea confirms these policies, including the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem and records of Persian administrative support for local cults. This approach reflected both ideological and practical considerations. By allowing communities to preserve their religious identity, the Achaemenids fostered loyalty and minimized the likelihood of rebellion. The empire's governance model relied on respect for local law, ritual, and tradition as integral to political stability. Local cults, temples, and priesthoods were frequently integrated into the imperial administrative apparatus. In Mesopotamia, for instance, Babylonian temples functioned not only as religious centers but also as nodes of economic activity, employing laborers, collecting tithes, and maintaining land. Persian rulers often subsidized these institutions, providing funding and protection in exchange for cooperation and tribute. Inscriptions and cuneiform tablets indicate that temple administrators regularly coordinated with satrapal authorities, illustrating the fusion of spiritual and bureaucratic networks. The policy of religious tolerance also extended to broader cultural pluralism. Conquered populations were allowed to continue linguistic, educational, and artistic traditions. Royal inscriptions from Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia record decrees issued in local languages, demonstrating respect for regional identities while ensuring integration into the empire's broader administrative and fiscal frameworks. This balance between central oversight and cultural accommodation contributed to the empire's longevity, making it one of the earliest models of a multicultural state. While tolerance promoted cohesion, it was not absolute. Persian authorities occasionally intervened in religious affairs when political or fiscal concerns were threatened. Rebellions sometimes prompted suppression of specific cults or temporary restrictions on priestly authority. Nevertheless, such interventions were pragmatic rather than doctrinal, reflecting a consistent pattern of prioritizing stability and resource management over religious uniformity. The empire's adaptability in religious policy exemplifies the Achaemenid systemic approach. Political and spiritual systems were tools to reinforce cohesion and imperial authority. The integration of religious practice with administrative and social structures strengthened the empire's capacity to govern diverse populations. By framing rulership in moral and cosmic terms while respecting local belief systems, the Achaemenids maintained order across vast and culturally heterogeneous territories. Their approach illustrates a sophisticated understanding of governance. Legitimacy derived not solely from force, but from the accommodation and recognition of multiple religious traditions. Ultimately, Persian religious policy demonstrates how tolerance and structured authority combine to sustain imperial cohesion. By balancing official ideology with practical accommodation, the Achaemenids fostered stability in regions marked by ethnic, linguistic, and spiritual diversity. This model of coexistence allowed the empire to function effectively for over 2 centuries, even as external pressures and internal strains gradually eroded its strength. Yet even tolerance could not shield the empire from decay. As power turned inward, empire began to consume itself. During the late Achaemenid period, court politics increasingly destabilized the central authority. Succession disputes, palace conspiracies, and rivalries among the royal family eroded confidence in the king and disrupted coherent governance. Historical accounts, including those preserved by Ctesias and later Greek historians, document a pattern of intrigue in which satraps and courtiers manipulated royal succession, sometimes assassinating potential heirs or promoting candidates aligned with their own interests. These internal power struggles diverted attention from administration and weakened the empire's ability to respond effectively to external threats. The bureaucracy, once a stabilizing force, became a theater of factionalism. Satraps, who were intended to enforce royal authority across distant provinces, sometimes colluded with palace factions to advance personal agendas. Letters and Persepolis tablets indicate occasional misappropriation of tribute and resources, reflecting how systemic oversight was undermined by entrenched personal interests. The central government's reliance on the loyalty of individual satraps meant that political corruption at the core often produced cascading effects throughout the provinces, weakening military readiness and administrative cohesion. The reigns of Artaxerxes II and Artaxerxes III exemplify this dynamic. Artaxerxes II faced multiple revolts by his own brothers and satraps, revealing the fragility of central authority. Artaxerxes III sought to consolidate power through force, executing rebellious governors and restructuring provincial oversight, but these measures often produced resentment, further fueling instability. Greek historians report that internal intrigue frequently coincided with failures to adequately fund or deploy armies, leaving frontier regions exposed and satraps more autonomous than ever. Corruption and intrigue also affected fiscal management. Royal treasuries were vulnerable to embezzlement by corrupt officials, while the misallocation of resources reduced investment in infrastructure, irrigation, and urban maintenance. Administrative inefficiency, compounded by nepotism and favoritism, weakened the empire's economic base, diminishing its capacity to support military campaigns and public works. Archaeological evidence from Persepolis suggests interrupted building projects and irregular tribute flows during this period, consistent with historical accounts of bureaucratic mismanagement. Social consequences of this instability were significant. Provincial populations occasionally experienced neglect, overtaxation, or inconsistent enforcement of law. Local elites exploited the situation to consolidate personal authority, further eroding the uniformity of imperial control. Despite these pressures, the empire's administrative and social frameworks were resilient enough to endure for several decades, illustrating that systemic weaknesses could coexist with institutional continuity, albeit precariously. In sum, palace intrigue and corruption during the late Achaemenid period undermined the structural integrity of imperial authority. Power struggles at the center not only weakened governance but also reverberated through provinces, reducing the empire's capacity to manage both internal administration and external threats. This period illustrates how the concentration of authority, when paired with factionalism and personal ambition, can destabilize even the most sophisticated imperial system. Weakness at the center opened the door to rebellion abroad. The satrapies that once held empire together now began to tear it apart. By the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE, the Achaemenid Empire's peripheral regions increasingly challenged central authority. Satraps, emboldened by the internal instability of the royal court, asserted autonomy and occasionally rebelled outright. Egypt, Anatolia, and Central Asia became the primary theaters of this fragmentation, illustrating how systemic weaknesses at the center directly translated into the erosion of imperial cohesion across vast distances. Egypt experienced repeated uprisings during the reigns of Artaxerxes II and Artaxerxes III. Greek and Egyptian sources describe attempts to restore native dynasties or assert local independence, often exploiting the empire's preoccupation with internal palace intrigues. In 404 BCE, the Egyptian revolt succeeded temporarily, establishing a degree of autonomy for more than a decade. The Persian response relied on costly military campaigns that drained resources and demonstrated both the logistical challenges and political limitations of projecting authority over distant satrapies. Archaeological evidence from Thebes and Memphis indicates periods of disruption and reorganization during these interventions, confirming historical reports of instability. In Anatolia, satrapal defiance was equally pronounced. Cities along the Aegean coast and inland regions exploited the empire's weakened oversight to negotiate more favorable terms or withhold tribute. The rebellion of the satrap Tissaphernes in the early 4th century BCE exemplifies the challenge of regional autonomy. His resistance, though eventually suppressed, highlighted the difficulty of enforcing centralized control over local power brokers who combined military, economic, and political influence. Herodotus and Xenophon document the frequent oscillation between submission and revolt in these regions, underscoring the chronic instability that plagued Persian governance. Central Asia presented a more complex challenge. Satrapies such as Bactria and Sogdiana were geographically remote and militarily demanding, with nomadic populations and local elites accustomed to significant self-rule. Revolts in these areas, including those led by regional leaders like Bessus during Darius III's retreat, reveal the empire's vulnerability when local authority outpaced central coordination. Aramaic and Babylonian administrative texts show delayed communication, inconsistent tribute collection, and limited military responsiveness, emphasizing the practical limits of Achaemenid administration in far-flung provinces. The structural causes of these rebellions were intertwined with economic, military, and administrative factors. Weak central authority reduced the capacity to enforce uniform taxation or law, while factionalism at court encouraged satraps to pursue personal gain rather than loyalty to the crown. Military deployments were increasingly reactive, leaving border regions susceptible to opportunistic uprisings. Furthermore, cultural and linguistic diversity made it difficult to cultivate a shared sense of imperial identity sufficient to discourage dissent. Despite these challenges, the empire retained pockets of cohesion. Loyal satraps, administrative continuity, and remaining bureaucratic infrastructure enabled the central government to suppress many uprisings, at least temporarily. However, these measures were often costly and short-lived, illustrating a pattern of reactive control rather than proactive governance. The cumulative effect of repeated revolts weakened both the fiscal and military foundations of the state, leaving the empire increasingly vulnerable to external invasion. By the time of Alexander's invasion in 334 BCE, the combined pressures of regional rebellion, fiscal strain, and court instability had left Persia strategically exposed. The empire's structural disintegration made rapid response to a coordinated Macedonian campaign nearly impossible, setting the stage for the final confrontation that would determine the fate of Achaemenid sovereignty. This unraveling set the stage for the empire's final confrontation. By the mid-4th century BCE, the empire that had ruled continents was running on memory. The final decades of the Achaemenid Empire were marked by administrative exhaustion, military overstretch, and the gradual erosion of centralized authority. Artaxerxes III r. 358 to 338 BCE, undertook a vigorous campaign to restore control over rebellious provinces, notably reconquering Egypt and suppressing satrapal insurrections in Anatolia and the Levant. Contemporary Greek sources, supported by archaeological evidence from Pelusium and Susa, record both the scale and brutality of these campaigns, which, while temporarily effective, drained imperial coffers and destabilized local economies. The reliance on force over systemic reform exposed the empire's diminished resilience. Military weaknesses became increasingly apparent. Armies were often composed of conscripted provincial levies rather than seasoned royal troops, and coordination across distant satrapies remained problematic. Logistics, though historically a Persian strength, struggled to keep pace with the scale and speed required to quell simultaneous uprisings in multiple regions. Tablets and inscriptions indicate delayed or incomplete tribute collection and provisioning, signaling both administrative fatigue and declining local compliance. The empire's martial apparatus, once a symbol of Achaemenid ingenuity, now reflected the strain of maintaining control over a fracturing polity. The reigns of Artaxerxes IV and Darius III, r. 336 to 330 BCE, further illustrate the structural decline. Court intrigue continued to undermine centralized authority, while satraps exercised increasing autonomy. Darius III ascended during a period of acute vulnerability, inheriting an empire with depleted resources, unsettled provinces, and strained military command. Attempts at administrative consolidation, including the reinforcement of satrapal oversight and rapid deployment of armies, were insufficient to offset both internal disarray and the external threat posed by Alexander's Macedonian forces. Economic pressures compounded political and military difficulties. Tribute collection, a critical component of imperial finance, suffered from regional defiance and bureaucratic inefficiency. Excavations in Babylon, Persepolis, and other key urban centers reveal interrupted construction projects, reduced provisioning for royal expeditions, and evidence of declining urban administration. These indicators collectively suggest an empire struggling to mobilize its traditional mechanisms of control, operating more on precedent and memory than effective governance. Despite these challenges, the Achaemenid Empire retained a degree of institutional continuity. Administrative frameworks, local governance structures, and cultural integration persisted, allowing Darius III to assemble an army capable of confronting Alexander. However, these efforts were reactive, constrained by structural exhaustion, and increasingly reliant on provincial cooperation rather than centralized authority. Greek and Babylonian sources emphasize that while the king remained the nominal center of power, the practical ability of the empire to assert dominance was eroded. By 330 BCE, with Darius III's defeat and death, the empire ceased to function as a unified political entity. Military collapse, administrative fatigue, and fragmented loyalty combined to bring an end to centuries of Achaemenid dominance. Yet the systems, culture, and traditions developed over the empire's life would persist, influencing subsequent empires in the region, including the Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian states. The final years of the Achaemenids thus represent both an endpoint and a transitional phase in Persian history. Military defeat marked the cessation of sovereign authority, but the empire's institutional and cultural foundations endured, demonstrating that while political control was finite, the legacy of Persian civilization was enduring. This fall, however, would echo for millennia. From Rome to Baghdad, echoes of Persia endured. The Achaemenid Empire established political and administrative paradigms that resonated across subsequent centuries and continents. Its model of centralized authority, combined with regional autonomy, became a template for later empires seeking to govern vast, diverse territories. Hellenistic rulers, following Alexander's conquests, adopted satrapal structures to maintain control over the former Persian lands, blending Greek political forms with Persian administrative logic. Records from Seleucid and Ptolemaic archives demonstrate continued use of tribute collection, provincial governance, and bureaucratic oversight inspired directly by Achaemenid precedents. Roman administrators, particularly in the eastern provinces, also drew from Persian examples. The organization of provinces, the integration of local elites into imperial governance, and the use of standardized communication networks echo the Persian approach to managing multi-ethnic populations. Latin and Greek sources recognize the sophistication of Persian bureaucracy, highlighting its efficiency in tax collection, legal administration, and military logistics. By providing a model of how to balance central authority with regional autonomy, Persia influenced the practical strategies through which Rome and other Mediterranean powers could govern extensive territories. The Sasanian Empire, 224 to 651 CE, represents a more direct continuation of Persian imperial principles. The Sasanians consciously revived Achaemenid administrative structures, ceremonial practices, and ideological frameworks. Satrapal administration, taxation, and legal systems were adapted and codified, while Zoroastrianism provided a state ideology reinforcing royal legitimacy. Archaeological evidence from Ctesiphon, Bishapur, and Nakshi-Rustam demonstrates continuity in monumental architecture, urban planning, and inscriptions, linking Sasanian statecraft directly to its Achaemenid antecedents. The Sasanians also served as a cultural and military foil to the Roman and Byzantine empires, projecting Persian influence across Western Asia for centuries. Beyond administration, Persia's legacy extended to culture, art, and economy. Royal road networks and trade systems established under the Achaemenids became templates for later transcontinental commerce, influencing Silk Road dynamics and Mediterranean trade. The integration of local religious and cultural practices into imperial policy provided a model for multicultural governance, offering lessons in tolerance and strategic accommodation that influenced Islamic caliphates and other successor states. Artistic motifs, relief iconography, and coinage conventions initiated under the Achaemenids persisted through Hellenistic and Sasanian periods, demonstrating a long-lasting visual and symbolic vocabulary that reinforced notions of imperial authority. Persian influence also shaped historiography and political thought. Greek historians, including Herodotus and Xenophon, studied and recorded Persian institutions, often highlighting their efficiency and rationality. Later Islamic scholars and chroniclers drew upon these accounts to understand governance, taxation, and imperial organization. The recognition of Persian administrative and legal sophistication informed the political imagination of subsequent rulers in the Middle East and beyond, creating a historical template that linked past practice to contemporary statecraft. By inspiring administrative design, military organization, economic integration, and cultural synthesis, Persia left an enduring imprint on world history. Its systems demonstrated how centralized authority, coordinated with local autonomy and cross-cultural accommodation, could sustain large-scale governance over diverse populations. The Achaemenid example provided both a blueprint and a cautionary tale. Effective administration and cohesion depended upon balancing structural integrity with flexible adaptation to local conditions. The Achaemenid legacy thus encompasses more than territorial conquest. Its influence persisted in the practical organization of later empires, in the continuity of cultural practices, and in the intellectual understanding of governance. By studying Persia's methods and innovations, historians recognize the enduring significance of its imperial model, which continued to inform rulers, states, and civilizations long after the fall of the last Achaemenid king. That legacy lived not only in politics, but in culture and memory. Centuries after Persepolis fell, its ruins still spoke the language of kings. The memory of the Achaemenid Empire endured long after its political collapse, shaping both regional identity and global historical consciousness. Classical Greek historians, particularly Herodotus, preserved narratives of Cyrus the Great and Darius I, emphasizing their administrative skill, military achievements, and policies of tolerance. These accounts transformed historical rulers into archetypal figures of wisdom, justice, and imperial authority, blending fact with selective interpretation to convey moral and political lessons. In doing so, the Greeks codified a lasting image of Persia as a sophisticated and expansive civilization, one capable of both military conquest and pragmatic governance. In the Near East, Persian memory played a central role in subsequent Iranian identity. The Parthian and Sasanian dynasties deliberately linked themselves to Achaemenid heritage through inscriptions, coinage, and monumental architecture, framing themselves as the legitimate heirs to a long-standing imperial tradition. Zoroastrian texts and court chronicles emphasized continuity of kingship, divine sanction, and the moral framework of governance, preserving both historical and ideological aspects of Persian statecraft. By invoking this lineage, successive rulers reinforced their authority and cultivated a shared sense of cultural and political identity across diverse populations. The Achaemenids also became symbolic figures in broader historical imagination. Cyrus, often idealized as Cyrus the Lawgiver, was celebrated in Judeo-Christian and later Islamic traditions for his policies of religious tolerance and the restoration of displaced peoples. Biblical references, particularly in the Book of Ezra, depict Cyrus as a divinely appointed ruler who allowed the Jewish exiles to return and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. These narratives contributed to a perception of Persian kingship as enlightened and just, cementing their place in moral and religious memory across cultures and centuries. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence reinforces the enduring presence of Achaemenid influence. Ruins at Persepolis, Pasargadae, and Susa were periodically restored, studied, and referenced by later societies, preserving architectural and artistic conventions. Reliefs, monumental inscriptions, and urban layouts became reference points for cultural continuity, demonstrating the visual and ideological impact of Persian imperial design. Even when politically displaced, these symbols continued to communicate power, legitimacy, and the moral authority of kingship, influencing subsequent empires across the Middle East and Central Asia. In modern Iranian national consciousness, the Achaemenid legacy occupies a central role. National histories, literature, and education emphasize Cyrus, Darius, and the empire's achievements as foundational to Iran's historical identity. Festivals, monuments, and scholarly research celebrate the Achaemenid emphasis on governance, tolerance, and cultural integration, linking contemporary Iranian identity to a continuous historical narrative that stretches back more than 2 millennia. The empire's administrative and cultural innovations are seen not merely as historical phenomena, but as formative contributions to the enduring concept of Iranian civilization. Globally, the Achaemenids remain a reference point for understanding early imperial administration, multicultural governance, and transcontinental economic networks. Historians, archaeologists, and political theorists study Persia as an example of effective integration of diverse populations, combining centralized authority with local autonomy. The empire's military, economic, and administrative structures serve as a lens through which scholars examine the emergence of world systems, illustrating the mechanisms that enable large-scale, sustainable governance in heterogeneous societies. The mythologization of Cyrus and Darius, combined with the tangible remnants of Persian civilization, ensures that the Achaemenid Empire continues to resonate culturally and historically. Its achievements, challenges, and enduring innovations contribute to both regional pride and global scholarly discourse, illustrating how the memory of empire can shape identity long after political control has ended. By examining these layers of memory, myth, and historical reconstruction, we gain insight into the ways Persia's legacy has been interpreted, celebrated, and appropriated across time and space. Thus ends the story of the first great world empire and the civilization that defined it. The Persian Empire proved that vastness need not mean chaos. The Achaemenid Empire stands as a singular example of early imperial organization, combining centralized authority with regional autonomy, administrative sophistication, and cultural tolerance. Its governance model demonstrates how complex societies can function across immense geographical scales when supported by effective bureaucracy, integrated communication networks, and pragmatic policies of inclusion. The satrapal system, standardized taxation, and archival practices ensured that diverse populations could coexist under a single political framework, while local traditions and religious practices were respected, reducing friction and fostering loyalty. Persia's approach to military, economic, and cultural management provides enduring lessons in statecraft. Roads, postal systems, and logistical coordination allowed for rapid response and information flow, sustaining both internal order and external projection of power. Economic policies, including coinage standardization, irrigation projects, and cross-regional trade networks, integrated a continental economy that facilitated stability and prosperity. The empire's monumental architecture, inscriptions, and ceremonial centers projected ideological cohesion, reinforcing the legitimacy of kingship and shaping perceptions of authority both within and beyond imperial borders. Tolerance and accommodation were central to Persia's longevity. Conquered peoples retained cultural, religious, and legal autonomy within the framework of imperial oversight, creating a model of governance that balanced hierarchy with flexibility. This system allowed the Achaemenids to maintain relative stability over 2 centuries, a remarkable achievement given the empire's diversity and size. The legacy of this approach is visible in subsequent empires, from the Seleucids and Sasanians to later Islamic and European states, demonstrating the lasting influence of Persian administrative and political innovations. Ultimately, the Persian Empire illustrates the possibilities and limits of imperial governance. While internal intrigue, regional rebellion, and military overstretch contributed to its eventual fall, the structural, cultural, and ideological foundations of Achaemenid rule endured. By blending authority with accommodation, military power with bureaucratic precision, and ideology with pragmatic tolerance, Persia set a precedent for the administration of complex, multi-ethnic states. The lessons of Persia's rise, consolidation, and decline underscore the interplay between human organization, geography, and governance. Its story offers a benchmark for understanding the challenges of empire building, the benefits of structured yet adaptable administration, and the enduring impact of cultural and political integration on world history. If you found this journey through the Persian Empire insightful, subscribe to continue exploring the world's greatest civilizations. Dive deeper with us into history's structures, cultures, and legacies, and discover how the past continues to shape our world today.